In the first administrative department of the Knights of Argus, the knights discussed the anniversary of the victory celebration. The girl asked how her colleagues had allocated the budget, to which they replied that the administrative assistant Miel had already prepared everything. All questions about the organization and subcontractors were also passed on to the heroine, and the dark-haired girl concluded that the girl was very busy, but then asked a question about the costumes. The young man answered her that Layla was running around the list of tailors that Miel had again prepared. The heroine really had a lot of work. Because of her inability to say no, many people dumped tasks on her, and even during lunch the girl worked. As he approached, her colleague expressed concern. But even to this, Miel began to ask if he needed help, and the young man told the girl to eat properly first. The young man interrupted them, confirming that without the heroine, it was like being without hands, and asked to give him the papers. But the second guy was indignant because Miel was the only one working on them and was not obliged to give him anything. The young man just grinned and said that there was nothing wrong with that. The main character was a bright, kind person, and, moreover, he also needed these papers. Miel immediately turned her attention to the one who had recently worried about her and asked again about the need for documents. This put the knight in a very awkward position because a couple of minutes ago he was unhappy with the request of another, and now he had to admit that he himself came for the same thing. The girl entered the office with a large box and, after greeting everyone, asked why everyone had gathered. The heroine immediately understood everything that was happening and immediately said that they were really asking the main character to do something instead of them again. Although Miel agreed, saying that it was a trifle and that everything was fine, Catherine began to scold and say that it was time to learn to refuse. At this time, one of the colleagues kindly offered to introduce the main character to someone, but the second guy nudged his friend with his shoulder. Catherine began to resent the fact that her senior colleagues, instead of helping with work, were asking for something for themselves, and this was the reason why the girl had so much to do. However, the girl had previously refused relationships and did not even want to think about the fact that they could exist. And while everyone was thinking that since Miel doesn't want a relationship, but they are being forced on her, then this is harassment, the girl herself laughed at it. The colleague persistently tried to convince her and said that maybe the girl would change her mind altogether, and the other one began to apologize for his friend and ask if she was tired of him, which attracted the attention of the main character, who immediately thanked her for her concern. The hero told Miel to try to rest more, because he had heard since the third section that the girl always sat up late alone. The hero continued, asking about the problems with the family, and saying that he understood Miel. The knight began to talk about his busyness since his marriage, and in the same way hinted at the girl's loneliness. The main character, feeling awkward, thanked him for his concern and clarified that she was doing well. The girl stayed late again and was still trying to remember whether she had finished her business. At one point, the heroine came to her senses and realized that she was late for the Lantern Festival, but looking at her watch, she realized that the festival had long since ended. Miel thought about the house and the fact that she would only have to cook for her sister, but deep in her head was the thought of her colleague. The girl, having thought over all the words again, agreed with them and explained to herself that the reason for everything was money. For the most part, the girl worked overtime not only because of the salary increase, but there was another reason. The man approached Miel from behind and immediately recognizing the heroine, said that he was just wondering who else was left in the office. The main character was scared because she clearly did not expect that someone would come to her at such a time. The Count himself approached the girl, expecting the documents that Miel was supposed to bring to his office. While the heroine was making excuses and saying that she was already going to go into the Count's office, the man himself asked how much work the heroine had left. Miel was a little embarrassed, and while she was thinking about her answer, the Count asked if the girl had a free minute tomorrow. The heroine immediately nodded positively, and at the same time agreed that she did have a free minute. The man asked Miel not to plan anything for lunch, which left the girl standing in shock. The Count, more formally, invited the girl to dinner, holding on to his tie and thereby helping himself to cope with his emotions. The girl was confused and shocked by such a tempting offer, so she stood in shock because another reason for Miel's delay at work was her unrequited love for the Count. Entering their shared family home, the heroine called her brother and sister, saying that they were coming. Selena immediately smiled at the girl's arrival and began asking about the day while Dennis was wiping his wet face after the shower. Miel started asking her family if they had eaten, to which her sister immediately hugged her older sister and answered positively, while the guy replied that he had eaten at work. The main character began to ask her brother about his job, because it was very dangerous at his previous place, but he told her not to worry and began to find out why Miel was in such a good mood. Selena agreed with her brother, to which the heroine smiled and turned all attention to the late hour and the fact that it was time for everyone to go to bed. The girl was so excited that she couldn't fall asleep because she could only dream of having dinner with the Count. While choosing beautiful clothes, Miel spun around in front of the mirror and, trying on different outfits, thought about the reason for the Count's sudden desire to have lunch with her. Having put on her shoes, the heroine began to give everyone homework that she could not complete before work, and the guys agreed and wished them good luck. All thoughts were filled with the upcoming dinner, so the heroine decided that it would be enough for her to just work together. Sitting at the table with the Count, the girl asked again what the young man had just said, since the state of shock prevented her from hearing it the first time. And Bernard, in turn, sitting in a luxurious outfit and looking at his subordinate, proposed marriage. The marriage proposal shocked the girl so much that she didn't even have time to cut her meat on the plate before she simply froze. Count, descendant of the noble Arctis family, to which many empresses also belonged, and 8 years ago under his command, a victory was won in the swampy lands. Thus it was possible to win the war with Deegan, and it was from that war that the Count returned as a hero. The young man saved many during the war, including Miel. For her, he became a master with whom she was not in love. Coming out of her thoughts, the main character asked again about the offer, since she did not understand what had come over the Count. After all, the girl is just his administrative assistant, a commoner without titles. Bernard was tired of listening to all this and, in order to interrupt Miel's speech, replied that status had nothing to do with it. And then he asked the girl if she remembered what she said at the reception a couple of months ago, and the heroine did not understand what he was talking about. The Count recalled Miel's words that she did not need a relationship either now or later, which made the main character very embarrassed, as she realized that the young man had heard everything. In fact, it was all because they were always trying to set the girl up with some knight right under Bernard's nose, but now she didn't explain it to him. And the young man concluded from this that Miel had no one and asked again why she didn't marry him. The girl, lowering her head, replied that for this to happen, people must love each other, or at least there must be mutual sympathy. Therefore, the main character considered refusal to be the best solution and voiced this to Bernard. The Count responded to this by saying that if everyone married only for love, then no one would enter into political marriages. Miel was confused and could not answer this, and the young man called the girl smart, but surprisingly naive, and asked if she had had anyone. While Bernard started talking about how this was the problem, the heroine exclaimed about the presence of more than 10 men before him, but immediately mentally regretted it, because it was a lie. This calmed the young man down, and he asked her to think about his proposal. After all, they will have a pleasant time in each other's company, and when the time comes, their paths will diverge, and these words really shocked the girl. Out of misunderstanding, the main character asked whether the young man meant divorce or something else. At that moment, Brandon realized that he had not said the most important thing, and began to explain that this was a marriage of convenience, but this did not make Miel feel any better. The young man continued to talk about how in 3 years he would hand over the county to his nephew, and then the Count asked the girl if she knew how he got the title. Miel answered positively and said that she regretted that it happened that way. Bernard said that the mourning was over, and although the young man had inherited the title, by tradition it should go to the son of his elder brother. In the meantime, protecting their lands for these 3 years is the young man's sacred duty. However, the Empress suggested that the Count marry one of the members of the imperial family, but it was unexpected for the girl that the Empress herself turned to the young man and she asked again. Bernard replied that he would refuse, despite the offer from such a high-status person, because the young man did not want to sow civil strife on their lands. But for this, the young man needs a reason, and he needs someone who will pretend to be his wife for these 3 years. Miel finally understood why the Count had asked her to marry him, but the young man interrupted and said that he had chosen her because she was the least suspicious, and he advised her to think it over. As Bernard continued to explain, the main character's heart was breaking because deep down she still hoped for mutual feelings. But if the girl agrees, the Count will pay off all the debts and add on top of that as much as he wants. The young man will also help to teach his brother and sister and later arrange for them. After these words, the young man asked about the purpose of such work of the heroine day and night. While Miel didn't know what to answer, Bernard added that he would not interfere in the girl's life. They would simply pretend to be happy spouses, and in return he would provide her with everything. At that moment, the main character was thinking that she didn't need any wealth and wouldn't take a penny from the Arctuses. But she alone, no matter how hard she tried, was unlikely to get her brother and sister back on their feet. Already on the way home, Miel tried to convince herself that agreeing to the marriage was the right decision. But in his head was the Count's question about feelings, because if the girl liked Bernard even a little, then the offer was invalid, and then he would no longer approach her with personal requests. And the main character had to lie, answering that she was absolutely indifferent to the young man, and remembering this, Miel began to cry. Grandma Miel always told her not to forget that they were of the Quarto family. And although the old woman taught the girl to write and count, they lived like everyone else, but their affairs became worse and worse. The debts grew every day, and the heroine just wanted to live like all normal people. But when Miel was 17, the war began. The first thing the father did was warn them that Dagon's troops were heading towards them and asked if the boys were going to run away, to which they answered in the negative. The man himself chose not to leave Kanheim because he believed that the war would soon end. There was no need to panic, and this was his mistake. The commanding officers began to take bribes because there had been no wars for a long time, and the captain ordered to leave Kanheim. The servant was shocked by these words, and the blonde explained to him that in order for the Dagons to reach the capital, they needed to take Kanheim, and while they are taking the city, they have time to prepare, and yet this order was carried out. The main character lost her parents, her younger sister stopped talking, all the papers confirming the noble origin of the children burned, and they became war refugees. As a result, the problems became even greater. Miel walked around the city and begged on her knees to take her on at least some kind of work. The girl was once again refused, warned that if she continued to come, she would have problems, but the heroine's brother and sister had not eaten for several days, so she did not leave. To this, the man replied that no one here had anything to eat, and that those who were in an even worse situation came to him. After all, the war is over, but people are still dying like flies, since the financial situation in the cities leaves much to be desired. But the girl continued to explain that if she did not work, her brother and sister would be among those lying in the cold ground. The citizen did not feel a drop of pity for these words, and he told him to go beg for alms and not to plead for work. Miel was confused by these words, but the man added that she should go to Bart since he usually has a lot going on and maybe the girl could get something. While the main character was thinking about how she would now have to beg and distracting the seller, some young man robbed the shop. The man noticed this quite late, so the only thing he could do was run as fast as he could to catch up with the guy. Miel immediately noticed the fruit, because the younger ones had actually been sitting hungry for several days. But the girl's upbringing did not allow her to just up and run away, as the young man did. Therefore, after standing like that for a couple more minutes, the main character chose not to take advantage of this opportunity and left with the thought that she still needed to get some food. Miel immediately remembered Bart, whom the merchant had mentioned, but she still couldn't believe that there was such a place in Kanheim. There were no refugees here because even their own people simply didn't have enough jobs. Officers arrived in the city and were tasked with rebuilding the system, since during the war only the rich had managed to preserve their wealth. Also in Kanheim were the Knights of Arcutz under the command of Bernard. Having won the war, they never returned to the capital, but stayed here and helped rebuild the city, despite the fact that they understood that their military glory would quickly be forgotten. However, for the residents, they forever remained the saviors of all of Kanheim. But all people, not robots and knights, began to get tired of this time and ungrateful people. Many citizens never had enough, and instead of words of gratitude, the knights received reproaches and indignation directed at them. There were also those who complimented young men with the aim of marrying their daughters to them, and the boys had to endure all this, responding politely. The main character also came to them for help, to which the young man immediately offered her a ration. Miel agreed, and the young man immediately handed her the bread, saying that it was just a little, but he could not give her more. The girl was very grateful for this too, looking after the knight who was already leaving. There were many thoughts in her head. The main character tried to convince herself that everything was fine, and she did everything right, and at least today Dennis and Selena would have food. At this point, the girl decided to go home, continuing to think about the need to find a job, but she was distracted by the conflict. The employee beat one of the residents who came for food yet again, telling him to go to work and not go begging. And yet, the man, hearing the boy's plea for mercy, let him go and said that he was tired of chasing people like him in the mornings and turned his gaze to the heroine. The knight immediately asked if she had come to beg, but Miel was frightened by the situation earlier, and it was difficult for the girl to say anything. This silence only made the employee more aggressive, and he told her to answer immediately, to which the main character answered with difficulty that she needed a job. After these words, the man's anger immediately went away, and he praised Miel for looking for a job. Then the knight took the girl by the chin and, having complimented her, asked her to help him while away the night. The employee began to list that the girl needed food, money, and clothes, and one night with him, and the heroine would receive enough to last for a couple of days. Continuing to touch Miel's face, the man asked again about the solution, because he considered his proposal to be very good. But the main character thought differently, because she understood that he would rather throw her out than pay for that night, and called the man a liar. For this, the girl immediately received a strong slap in the face and insults directed at her. After the blow, Miel fell to the ground, and the employee only asked why she was being disrespectful, since even though she asked for a job and not food, it did not make her any different from the others. According to the knight, the girl was and remained a small insect, and the heroine did not understand why this was happening to her and all the residents. After all, they say that the capital is drowning in luxury after the victory, and why then is Canheim so mired in poverty? While the main character was thinking that she just wanted some bread for the younger ones, the man swung his arm to deliver another blow and said that although Miel had the right to choose, she had no right to refuse. But the count, who had arrived unexpectedly, interrupted the servant, ordering him to stop, thereby frightening him. The girl immediately understood who this young man was and immediately saw hope in him, while the knight himself tried to justify himself. But Bernard didn't even listen to him and said that a man's job is to give food to the residents, not to drive them away. And the count ordered the servant to get to work, to which he immediately ran to his workplace. After that, Allison, the young man's assistant, said that it was time for them to go, because they had a lot of things to do today. And the higher-ups won't like it if we don't provide a report on the post-war state of Canheim on time, so we can't put it off. The count agreed, and they headed in the right direction, but Miel, almost with tears in her eyes, asked the young man to stop. This attracted the attention of the young man, but he continued walking anyway, and the girl had already grabbed him by the pants, asking him to help. When Bernard finally stopped, Allison insisted on going, saying that even if the count helped now, the heroine would not thank him, but would only ask for more. Miel immediately replied that she was not asking for alms, she wanted the young man to give her a job. These words surprised even the assistant, and he turned around, but the count did not react to this in any way. And the girl continued to beg, saying that she would work and that she did not need government bread, and in her head, thoughts were spinning that this was her chance, which she could not miss. Bernard never turned to the main character and only told her to leave, because there are many like her. Miel did not give up, thinking that she was lucky to survive, and she had to try until the last, because no one would help her tomorrow. And the girl said that she can count and knows that they need a lot of people to rebuild the city after the war, and they need those who will count the losses. The count turned around and decided to listen, but Ellison told the young man that he had nobles who knew how to count, and there would certainly be craftsmen loyal to him. Miel began to object, saying that Bernard would not find anyone but her who would agree to work for pennies, but the girl deliberately belittled her work. In fact, she knew that she was worth more. The main character also said that she would agree to work for a loaf of bread a day, which shocked the assistant. The girl begged him to take her on, but the count continued to look sternly at Mieli and remain silent. The grandmother, giving important advice to her granddaughter, said that even if hard times come, they will end someday. But no matter what happens, the girl should not forget to study. Sitting in a chair and reading a book, Miel watched as her grandmother told her important things that could be useful in life, and that if the main character tries, then one day fate will smile on her. So the girl continued to sit on the cold and damp ground, looking at the Count with fear and at the same time with hope. The Count's assistant immediately responded to his captain and said that the man was already helping the people here without returning to the capital, so there was no need to worry about the heroine. Bernard, looking at Miel's bad appearance, asked if she would definitely take on absolutely any job that could be given to her. The main character took a deep breath and immediately shouted out her agreement to the question, showing the confidence of her words. The Count was a little surprised by the girl's strong determination, so he couldn't even find words in response. In the end, Bernard turned around and told Ellison that he was leaving for a meeting, and then gave the guy the task of taking Miel to the barracks, having prepared an employment contract. The girl looked at the young man in shock, continuing to sit on the ground and not believing what was happening. While in the Count's private office, Ellison stood behind his captain and tried to understand the seriousness of the words that the man had spoken towards Miel. Bernard did not react to this in the best way, but the assistant reacted in time and immediately said that he had no right to disobey the order. The guy, feeling a little afraid of his words, suggested that if it got to the higher-ups that it was the Count who hired the refugee, then unnecessary conversations might start. For the top brass, this situation could become a major talking point, but Bernard, although he understood the whole point, still considered this a good idea. The man immediately said that they were short of hands and the girl would play a big role because no one wanted to come from the capital or they were just pursuing their own goals. The Count's opinion of Miel was not bad, since he saw that the girl was completely desperate in finding a job, and the young man simply could not pass by. Even though Allison agreed with the captain's words, he still wanted to put forward other proposals, but the man reassured the guy by saying that he had warned the heroine about the consequences. Early in the morning, as soon as the sky turned blue, Miel was already standing next to the man who was supposed to give her a job. The young man, looking at the documentation, asked how the girl had ended up in such a job. Having updated her image a little, the main character looked at the man and, a little worried, answered ambiguously. The Count had previously warned the heroine that it was forbidden to say who exactly got the girl the job. After thinking about her answer for a while, Miel simply decided to lie and say that she saw an ad on the walls of buildings. The guy was extremely surprised and asked where it came from. The guy's thoughts were only in guesses and suspicions, since the girl was good, but the story about the reason for the device caused mistrust. The man decided to put aside his mistrust and, getting up from the box, went to show the heroine her new job. Miel's main task was to keep track of everything that was in the knight's warehouse, and if something was missing, it was necessary to immediately inform the seniors in rank. Miel, looking at the building from the inside, realized the scale of her work, as there were a large number of huge boxes inside. After asking the man about the details of his work, the guy immediately nodded positively. The warehouse manager continued talking about the task and the fact that the girl would have to check the contents of everything in the warehouse every day. While Miel was trying to accept the information and realize the responsibility of her job, the man looked questioningly at the heroine. The young man immediately calmed the main character down, telling her about his help and warning her to be more careful. Miel set to work, carrying heavy boxes and checking the contents. But she didn't have to carry the heavy stuff for long, because the man told her to leave the heavy stuff with him. The heroine carried out her tasks responsibly and wrote down everything down to the very last detail. The work dragged on until the night, and while the man continued to deal with the physical aspects, Miel actively wrote everything down in a notebook. The first bread the girl earned was for her younger brother and sister, for whom the heroine wanted to work. The desire to eat was very strong. The relatives wanted their older sister to eat too, so they began to share food, but Miel refused. One of those wonderful working days, the man came with a whole basket of different types of bread, which he bought especially for the girl. The heroine was very shocked by such a gift, but the young man continued and said that while buying everything for the younger ones, she herself does not eat. The man, having handed the basket into the girl's hands, proudly began to tell her that this bread was yesterday's from a restaurant, but even to this the main character was extremely grateful. While Miel and the warehouse manager were discussing the lack of workers, since everyone already had a lot of work, the guy said that he had news. The young man continued and said that the girl would be moving to work in the administration starting tomorrow. The news about the administration shocked the heroine so much that, hugging the basket, the girl immediately thanked the man. A lot of time has passed where autumn has changed to winter and winter to spring, but nevertheless, Miel's hard work has not disappeared. Standing in the office with a lot of papers in her hands, the girl listened to her colleagues' admiration for the fact that she worked a lot and had already done everything. While the guy openly tried to flirt with the heroine, talking about dinner and offering his help, the heroine herself felt uncomfortable and politely refused, adding that everything was fine. But this did not stop the young man. Allison, standing behind the young man and taking him by the shoulder, interrupted the uncomfortable dialogue for the heroine, saying that the girl had expressed herself clearly and starting to swear. The man immediately ran away, and Allison at this time apologized and expressed indignation at the impudence of this guy. Although the girl said that everything was fine, she also received a reprimand since the young man asked Miel to speak up immediately about such cases. The heroine's opinion was different, and she did not consider it right to bother such superior people about her problems. However, the guy came for a specific reason, so he caught the girl's attention with words of importance and said that they would soon leave Kanheim. The heroine immediately panicked and, after asking again, she again received the words that the knights were returning to the capital. These words made the girl's heart beat wildly, and her breathing quickened due to shock because this news was very unexpected. Over the course of a year, things in the city have improved, as most of the agricultural land has been restored, so hunger can be forgotten and the streets have become much safer. The guy continued his speech about how the Count's work in this city was almost finished, and while the young man was saying this, the girl stood there nervously. Clutching the papers and holding them close, Miel felt extremely worried. Allison was about to offer something to the girl when suddenly the heroine abruptly interrupted the guy. The main character, bowing as a sign of respect, thanked the guy for everything he had done for her earlier. While Allison looked at the girl's behavior in surprise, Miel herself continued her speech about the difficult times she had gone through and how the girl was able to help her brother and sister. Holding back tears, the heroine did not plan to finish saying words of gratitude, but Miel was stopped by a young man who felt extremely awkward. Having cried a little, the girl raised her head and, looking at the Count's assistant, heard words about a tempting offer. Sean praised the main character's hard work so much that Allison was surprised that the guy didn't get tired of speaking. It's hard to find a person as loyal as Miel, and that's why such talents belong in the capital. The girl looked at the Count's assistant in surprise and asked again, to which the guy continued. And if the heroine agrees, she will work in the 3rd Administrative Department. The Count has already given the go-ahead, so the word was only up to Miel. After these words, the young man extended the letter towards the girl. Miel looked at it and immediately thought about everything that was happening. Sitting at home at night and putting her brother and sister to bed, the main character reread the letter several times in order to make a clear decision. And gradually the girl realized that there was no reason to refuse, because remaining with the knights, there would be no problems with money, and it would be possible to place the younger ones in school. And also, of no small importance is the presence of the Count nearby, with whom the girl is unrequitedly in love. But it was enough for Miel to look at her sleeping brother and sister, and suddenly doubts arose about whether they would be comfortable. It's a 2-month journey from Kanheim to the capital, and while the girl can endure it alone, the journey might be too difficult for children. And even if the family safely reaches the capital, will the younger ones be able to get used to the new environment, especially since Selena has only just started talking again? While the heroine was sitting in her thoughts, looking at the letter, her younger sister woke up. The girl was surprised that Miel was not yet asleep, while the girl herself immediately understood that the reason for awakening was in the light and apologized. Before the main character had time to blow out the candle, Selena, observing her sister's behavior, asked if everything was okay with her. And Miel wanted to tell everything, when suddenly she decided to ask about her younger sister's desire to move. The girl asked again in surprise, to which the heroine nodded positively and said that they should move to where there are schools and food and there is no war. While Miel was telling Selena about the new desired place, Dennis woke up from this conversation. However, the girl continued to say that this place was far from here and that one would need to get used to it. While the main character was saying that if the children didn't want to, they wouldn't go anywhere, Selena looked on, fascinated, as if she was thinking about her answer. And it didn't take long to wait for this answer from the girl, since she believed that she could go anywhere if her older sister was nearby. And Dennis supported the younger sister's answer, since they were a family and couldn't go anywhere without each other. Miel hugged her brother and sister, smiled, and realized how much she loved them. The capital, luxurious clothes, stylish people, big and clean streets, all this was very eye-catching and attracted attention. While Dennis and Miel looked around in shock, Selena was amazed by the luxury and beautiful streets. The main character looked towards the large building and understood that her past life could in no way compare to life in the capital. However, the girl's attention was drawn to a rather familiar voice that was coming from afar. It turns out that it was Sean who helped the main character in the knight's warehouse. The guy immediately thanked the girl for her response and for being able to make such a long and difficult journey. And while the main character was thanking her for her recommendations, the guy was already stroking the children's heads and getting to know Dennis and Selena. The guy from the warehouse starts praising the girl, saying that the heroine will succeed in the capital, thereby putting Miel into a stupor. While Sean was stroking Dennis's head, he immediately decided to express his opinion about the girl, or to be more precise, that he had never met anyone more devoted to her in his life. These words greatly encouraged Miel and at the same time significantly raised her spirits, because anxiety did not allow her to adapt in any way. The girl immediately thought that by trying her best, she would definitely do well, because she has no equal when it comes to work. It was late evening, work had long since ended, and the desire to rest was beginning to dominate, but the heroine still continued to complete what was necessary. Colleagues who passed by looked at her disapprovingly and said that she should also think about her health, but Miel immediately replied that everything was fine. Any overtime is paid extra, which is the motivation for the main character, since she needs to feed her family. However, there was something that diligence alone could not solve: prices. Miel, standing at the market and looking at the apples, realized that the prices in her city were much lower than in the capital. However, despite such a high fee, the heroine still took some fruit. At home, the girl was already holding a cauldron in her hands, with which she had been working all evening to prepare something tasty for her family. Selena immediately began asking her older sister what exactly they would be eating, to which the girl showed chicken soup. The boys' mouths began to water with the desire to have a delicious soup for dinner, because in their opinion, their older sister's soup was the most delicious. Having eaten everything to the last crumb, the brother and sister looked in shock at their empty plate, thus giving the heroine a reason to worry. Selena immediately shouted that this soup was the most delicious, to which the girl immediately burst into tears of happiness, realizing how much pleasure her happy brother and sister brought her. The prices here are sky high, and so her hometown can't even be compared to the capital. But thanks to the knights providing housing, Miel has one less big problem. However, the salary was not enough to live on, so from the moment of her arrival, the girl was tormented by anxiety about money and whether there would be enough of it. And while there was one problem in her head, another one suddenly appeared: Dennis's studies, because he was almost 14, and the girl was afraid that her brother would go to work instead of studying to help his sister. The girl's head is also filled with memories of her sitting on the cold ground and shouting to the count that no one but her would agree to work for pennies. This is the reason why Miel is simply afraid to ask for a raise. Having made some fairly strict conclusions, the girl decided that since this was how it turned out, she would simply work constantly. After the meal, the children began to do their homework, but the chaos in Miel's head continued. The heroine's whole life turned into a routine, and starting from the very morning, the girl first checked the weather, then cooked breakfast and dinner for her brother and sister. The next steps were work, and it didn't matter whether it was lunch or just a light break. In absolutely any situation, the heroine tried to work, even staying after work, just so she could have more money. This routine was so tiring that the heroine felt like she was on a wheel that had to be turned. At least once a week, Miel wanted to leave early to study with Dennis and Selena, but if any work appeared on the weekend, the heroine immediately ran there. This routine continued for a long time, but then the anniversary of the victory celebration arrived, which was celebrated very noisily in the capital. The head of the department, clapping his hands and thereby attracting the attention of the workers, said that everyone was leaving early. The department was cleaning up after the celebration, but they decided to do that tomorrow and spend time having fun now. The boss immediately warned everyone that even if someone decided to stay in the office, there would be no extra pay, since today was a holiday and everyone had to go home. And while everyone was delighted, Miel didn't like the idea at all, because she was only interested in the bonus. While the girl was flying in a daze and thinking about her personal problems, suddenly a man came up from behind and told the heroine to go home, which scared her a lot. The girl burst into tears from fear and immediately jumped back a meter, starting to apologize, but the boss interrupted her and asked if Miel really wanted to stay today. The guy started talking about how he had been asked many times about why the girl stayed up late every day. The man said that he considered the heroine to be very good and hard-working, but he was still against constant delays after work, which could negatively affect health. While the girl was listening to the boss, everyone was actively discussing how Bernard had defeated his opponents in his time, but one of the guys would like to see it live, and the other one feels uneasy just from the thought. One of the young men said to stop talking about the war since it was Victory Day, and it was better to talk about something better now. From fatigue and constant stress, the girl fell out of reality and simply went into her thoughts, but the man's scream brought her back to consciousness. The boss just sighed heavily and gave permission for the heroine to continue working, but for a little while, and then to close everything behind her. Miel, still standing in that position, responded positively to what was said. Victory Day is the day when the whole country remembers the brilliant victory achieved over the enemy in a long and grueling war. On this day, people remember how the news of victory echoed throughout the empire, and in memory of this, the people celebrate all night. However, this day is not a happy one for everyone, because some barely survived this war and may even have suffered losses. The heroine, during the war, lived with her family in a destroyed house and constantly heard explosions, hiding from enemies. Unlike the others, the girl has no positive memories of this war. The morning after the decisive battle, Miel looked out the window, which simply took her breath away. The knight's banner shone brighter than the sun and gave hope for a safe future. At the head of the procession stood the Count, from whose gaze the heroine immediately felt both relief and fear. Something unknown mixed inside the heroine's feelings and pierced her very heart. As Miel walked down the hallway, her brother and sister were on her mind, wondering what they might be doing now. These thoughts made it clear that it was time to go home, because on this day, the heroine should be with her family. The noise from the fireworks made Miel freeze with fear as memories from the war came flooding back. Screaming in fear and covering her head with her hands, the heroine began to tremble and lost control of her body. Even knowing that it was not a cannon salvo, the girl still could not move. However, the girl was helped to come to her senses by none other than the Count himself, who inquired about her condition. The guy looked at Miel and tried to find out why the heroine hadn't gone home yet. The girl was so shocked that she immediately began to stutter in front of the Count, trying to say at least a word. The main character immediately stood up straight and, panicking, shouted that she was late because of the holiday, but Bernard said that he also had to return to the building for some reason. As it turned out, the reason was a torn epaulette, and the Count simply returned to change his clothes. The young man began to talk about how he allowed everyone to leave early in honor of the holiday, but the girl still decided to stay and work, to which the heroine simply agreed. Remembering the past and how the girl worked in Kanheim, the Count immediately said that he had heard rumors that the girl had stayed after work before. Panic overwhelmed her, and paranoia followed, so the fear of being scolded by the captain began to take the lead, and the heroine thought that Bernard considered her unproductive. Therefore, the girl immediately explained that she was staying after work because of the extra pay, and shocked the Count in the same way. The guy asked again in surprise, watching Miel, who was already red from embarrassment. However, a minute later, Bernard realized that the heroine was still receiving her old salary. Amidst the fear and panic, Miel resigned herself to her fate and simply waited for the scolding to continue. But for now, the young man was only interested in the question of why this happened, because the main character should receive it differently. The Count then asked whether the girl had asked her boss for a raise, to which Miel replied that she had agreed to work for the lowest wage and was afraid that she would be fired for asking for a raise. The young man was outraged by this because he assumed that the heroine considered him a monster. The girl herself was already standing there, all red and shaking in tears from shame and fear. And since that was the case, the Count told Miel to come to the main building tomorrow. The heroine was shocked by these words and asked again because she thought she had misheard. Bernard repeated that from tomorrow, Miel would be working in the first administrative department, to which the girl reacted even more surprised. After all, if the third department deals with complaints from citizens and organizing holidays, then the first department distributed funds and labor, which means the girl will work side by side with the Count. The young man continued talking about the promotion, saying that he would personally check that the girl had a good salary and suggested that the heroine had suffered a lot lately. And Miel replied that she was not suitable for the position, but Bernard ignored this and said that he thought Allison was keeping an eye on her, and since there were no questions, the Count did not pay attention. In fact, Allison had long been outraged by the girl's salary, but when he came to the commander, he saw that he was not in the mood and thought to come later. In the end, Bernard apologized to the main character, and the girl herself was surprised that the Count asked her for forgiveness. Finally, the young man asked Miel not to stay out too late, because although it was safer here than in Kanheim, it was still dangerous on the streets late at night. The young man also added that he would send one of the knights with the girl to take her home. The main character, due to shock and various thoughts in her head, could not even thank the Count and simply watched him go. In the morning, Allison was standing at the first department, and when Miel arrived, he immediately began to say that he was sorry, since he should have paid attention to this problem. The young man felt so guilty that he was now ashamed to look the girl in the eyes, but the heroine said that he was not guilty of anything, and that she herself should have told him everything earlier. Moreover, now the main character was pleasantly surprised by such a salary increase and immediately began to actively thank her. Allison replied that Miel worked very hard, and he felt that the standard salary was not enough. After these words, the young man showed the office of the first department and also added that lunch is paid for and dinner too, if you stay late. Allison wanted to continue, but they were distracted by a coworker who was just heading to work. Miel immediately greeted the guy nicely, to which he simply looked back with a bit of displeasure and went into the office. The girl was confused by this attitude towards her, and Allison, noticing this, said that rumors had already reached the employees that the commander had personally promoted her. The main character panicked a little, but the young man added that everyone had misunderstood and warned that for now, colleagues would treat Miel with caution. And hearing this, the girl calmed down and replied that she would do everything to ensure that the gossip was quickly forgotten, although she herself believed that it would not be easy. While the heroine was deep in her thoughts, that same employee asked if her name was Miel. The girl immediately bowed and responded positively, saying that she would be happy to work together. But the young man again didn't react at all and handed Miel the papers with the words that it was urgent and needed to be sorted out as soon as possible, to which the girl immediately agreed. And as soon as the main character picked up the papers, she understood the scale of the work and was surprised by the large amount. Then the girl asked about the deadline, and the young man told her to hand everything in by the evening. Miel felt a little uncomfortable that they were treating her like that, but she understood that for the others, it was unknown how she had ended up there, and it was quite logical that the heroine would not be welcome. Having accepted this fact, the girl began to work with the thought that she would continue to work as hard as before. The sun had just begun to set, and the main character had already brought the finished documents to the young man's table with a request to check them. The young man was surprised that Miel finished so quickly because there were a lot of papers, and he asked again, to which the girl repeated that everything was ready and found out about additional assignments. But the guy let the main character go, and while Miel was packing her things, thoughts were spinning in her head about how well she had done and whether she had made any mistakes. Seeing that the girl had already gotten ready, the young man said goodbye sweetly, to which the heroine responded in the same way, and happily headed towards the exit. Miel was so happy with how the day had gone that she didn't notice anything around her. And even the Count, who noticed that the girl was leaving on time today. As soon as the main character noticed the man, he immediately asked if she liked the first section. Miel responded enthusiastically that everything was fine and that her salary had been raised greatly, so the young man no longer had to worry about her. But the heroine immediately realized that she had started discussing her salary with her boss again and blushed, while Bernard had already gone about his business and wished the girl a good journey home. In response, Miel thanked the man and noticed that something was wrong with her. After all, the main character's heart was almost jumping out of her chest, and this only happened when she saw the Count, but the girl did not understand why. Feeling her face, Miel realized that in addition to her rapid heartbeat, she was also flushed, which made her even more confused about what was happening. Another working day has ended, and all the knights of the First Administrative Department are going home. However, the girl preferred to train while everyone else was thinking only about the soul. Swinging a stick at one of the special effigies, the knight hit it with all her might and broke it. Catherine looked proudly at the result of constant training, and a guy was hanging around behind her and constantly commenting on everything. Admiring the girl's grace and endurance, the young man expressed his desire to stay close to Catherine. The heroine didn't like this proposal, so instead of saying anything, the girl simply hit the guy in the face with a stick. Taking advantage of the situation, Catherine said that it was time for her to leave, and that even if the young man had told the truth, it was not worth taking the girl's example. The knight also clarified that there would soon be training at the First Administrative Department, and that no one should relax. It's been a year and a half since Miel moved from the third department to the first. The girl stayed up late all this time, and her back and shoulders were already hurting from the constant strain, so from time to time, the heroine massaged her aching shoulder. However, while Miel was warming up, she felt something start to flow down her lips, and realizing that it was blood, the heroine immediately came to her senses and looked at the papers that were already stained. The girl still needs money, and since the work is not difficult, the main character makes it on time, but Miel is late because she wants to be noticed. One summer day 6 months ago, the heroine stood with the Count near the jewelry counter, and while the Count was just calmly looking at the jewelry, the girl was red as a tomato. When the main character was heading towards the knights, someone shouted the girl's name and scared her a little. As it turned out, it was one of her colleagues who asked Miel to take important mercenary contracts that were subject to termination to where she was going. Thinking about this matter, the guy said that it seemed that the Count had planned something large-scale because the war had ended long ago, and it was unclear why they were only now reducing the army. Another said that the Supreme One needs to control the Count, while all the others are unfortunate victims of these political games. The young man apologized to Miel for asking her to do extra work, to which the girl replied that everything was fine and everything would be done in the best possible way. The heroine said goodbye to the guys and left, and the guys, looking at the girl, discussed how lucky they were to have her. The last thing one of the colleagues said before leaving was that he felt guilty for being strict with the girl at the very beginning. The heroine, heading to the knight's core, thought over all her actions and whether she had really managed to do everything. But the girl was attracted by a familiar voice that was heard meters away from her. Allison told the Count that the captain was taking on too much and that it was impossible to please everyone, but these words were able to anger even such a stone young man. And the Count said to stop. But while the guys were having a conversation, the girl's breath froze and her pupils dilated because Bernard himself was there. The young man, looking at his assistant, says that one more unnecessary word and all of Ellison's behavior will be considered insubordination. And the young man was about to continue when suddenly he heard a strange sound and looked towards the source, which frightened Miel very much. After waiting a bit, the girl couldn't stand the tense situation and looked out, and Allison immediately shouted the girl's name, which made the heroine's legs go weak. Miel began to justify herself, saying that the girl didn't even want to eavesdrop and that it was all just a coincidence, but Allison immediately began to swear and say the opposite. While the boys were arguing, the Count simply watched silently from the side. But a couple of minutes later, Bernard asked if the girl was from Canheim, which unpleasantly shocked Ellison, and from the heroine he received a positive answer. And silently, the Count began to approach the girl, while the assistant was so surprised that he stood with his mouth slightly open. The heroine did not understand anything and, a little embarrassed, asked the young man what the question was for. The young man, looking at Miel, simply asked for help. When she came to an expensive jewelry store, the girl got a headache from the wealth she saw. The guy, pointing to the display case, asked the heroine to choose the most beautiful decoration, but the girl was so embarrassed and shocked that, standing up like a soldier, she tried to come to her senses. But looking at the large selection, my eyes began to run wild and panic overwhelmed me, and this interfered with the choice, because every thought was filled with only guesses about the beloved and the decoration that would be bought for her. The Count said that the girl who would receive the gift loved stones mined in the south, and Miel was from Kanheim. After these words, Bernard began to examine the jewelry and say that he didn't understand anything about it. And saying that the heroine should understand this, he asked for some advice, but these words put Miel in an awkward position. Looking at each piece of jewelry, the girl's heart began to beat faster, and the sweat became cold because the fear of choosing something bad was great. The Count stood and waited at first, but then decided to inquire about the heroine's preferences, to which Miel, folding her arms, simply began to choose faster. Looking at what stood out the most, the girl made a choice, but inside everything was shrinking and aching with sadness. After the words about who this gift was for, Miel no longer had any desire to continue the conversation, so the girl silently looked at the floor. The Count's request at the checkout finished her off, to pack everything nicely, and everything started to go black before the heroine's eyes, because literally just now the girl found out that she didn't have a chance after all. The main character began to drown in thoughts because she understood that a representative of high society would never pay attention to a girl like Miel. According to the heroine, even if the Count is able to pay attention to her, the girl herself will only mistakenly think that their feelings are mutual. Continuing to wind herself up, Miel decided that the Count hardly remembered the heroine's name, and that for Bernard the only important thing was that all the tasks were completed on time. The heroine had never seen jewelry with her own eyes, so this situation looked much worse, and, unable to bear such pain, the girl began to cry, realizing how stupid it all was. Miel walked and drowned in her tears, but she still did not understand their cause. The Count, taking out a necklace, said that it was for the main character and began to put it on her neck. Miel was very shocked by this, because this was something she could only dream of. But then the girl wakes up and realizes that the dreams remained dreams and it was just a dream. Jumping out of bed, the main character began to think about why she had such a dream, because although she was upset then, it was not that much. And suddenly her attention was drawn to Selena, peeking out from behind the door and looking at the older one with fear. As soon as Miel asked about the reason for her visit, the girl immediately ran to the bed, saying that she was scared. And the girl was only glad, because after the dream, she realized that she needed to think more about the children, and immediately suggested that the youngest sleep together today. And that's also why the main character got back to work and even started doing assignments for her colleagues, even though their affairs didn't concern her at all. But all this is so that the children are always well fed and have absolutely everything they need. Although deep down, the girl still believed that she was overworking herself at work. But Miel really wants to repay the Count for his kindness and perhaps attract his attention in this way. And with these thoughts, the heroine fell asleep on her desk. Bernard, walking home with his assistant, noticed a light in the only window in the entire building. And the young man immediately asked Ellison if there was anyone else, to which the blue-haired man suggested that it was Miel, and added that the girl had been staying late a lot lately. The Count remained silent, but his gaze clearly changed to one that was more displeased and thoughtful. After some time, the main character woke up on the same table in confusion. The girl hoped that no one saw her, even though she saw a silhouette in front of her, albeit a little blurry. Literally, a couple of seconds after these thoughts, Miel finally realized that someone was sitting opposite her, but the girl was scared and did not understand who exactly. And only when the Count asked if the heroine had woken up, Miel understood everything, and jumping up from her seat, thought only about not getting fired. While the heroine was panicking because the commander had dropped in on her, Bernard began to question the reason for her late presence in the office, since it was cool in the offices at night. The girl did not hear at all what they were saying to her, because for her it all seemed impossible. And the Count, in response to the main character's silence, concluded that he was a bad boss and asked about it. And this question brought Miel out of her thoughts. And the girl asked again, to which the young man explained that he came to ask the heroine not to stay any longer, since these matters were not urgent. Miel stood there in a stupor, thinking that the Count was reprimanding her, and the man continued and added that the girl's salary should be enough to live in the capital. After these words, the main character became a little upset, as she realized that Bernard was not worried about her, but simply came for work. And the girl said that she was staying at work for the extra pay to pay off the family's large debts. To be clear, Miel also said that she is not complaining in any way and that her salary is quite sufficient. In fact, the family really did have a lot of debt, but during the war all the archives burned down, so now the girl is brazenly lying. The main character understood that lying was bad, but she also did not consider it necessary to tell the truth. After all, in reality, Miel worked so hard only so that Bernard would at least look at the girl. The young man thought about these words because it was unexpected for him. It seemed to him that with such a salary, he removed financial problems from the heroine's life. But in the end, the Count replied that he understood everything and suggested that the girl was having a very hard time now, to which Miel replied that she was doing well, and in her thoughts she was surprised by the guy's trust. And having said this, the main character thanked Bernard for covering her and handed the cloak back. Before leaving, the Count mentioned the gift they had chosen together, and this surprised the girl a little because she thought it was a necklace for the young man's bride and did not understand why he was raising this topic now. But Bernard continued, saying that his brother's wife liked it and thanked the heroine for her help. Miel asked again very emotionally about who the gift was for, which caused some misunderstanding in the young man, and the Count explained that his brother's beloved was soon to give birth to an heir, so a gift was needed, and he thought that the entire administrative department was aware of it. To this, the girl calmly replied that she understood, but in fact she was overwhelmed with emotions, because before that she looked through the list of gifts and did not understand why there were so many. Realizing that all her worries about the Count's bride were for nothing, Miel blushed deeply and covered her mouth with her hand. But Bernard interrupted the flow of thoughts, telling the heroine to go home, as it was already very late. The main character responded positively and thanked the young man once again as she said goodbye. And yet, sitting down to work again, Miel realized that she felt bad about having disobeyed the Count, and what's more, lied. But the main character accepted it just as quickly because today the girl is happier than ever. A month later, one day, when Miel was returning home, someone called out to her and pushed her against the wall. It was Catherine, and she told the heroine that they had something to talk about and asked if she didn't mind. Some time ago, the red-haired girl was informed that she was now accompanying the commander. The girl, surprised, asked again and called it nonsense, to which the knights said that there were rumors about this and, in general, such a position was deserved because the lady was talented. Catherine still didn't understand anything, and the young men only finished her off with words about their worries about the girl not getting a promotion because of the new girl. The heroine began to get very angry because of the misunderstanding, but the guys just continued to praise her and asked her not to forget them while in her new position. And a second later, Catherine was already shouting and asking what the knights were talking about, since she only walked back and forth from the site to the office and physically could not accompany the commander. After this, everyone began to actively think about where the rumors came from, and one of the young men suggested that Miel and the girl had the same names. Now the guys realized that the rumors were not true, and that they were talking about a new girl who just happened to work in the administrative department and was called a shadow employee. Catherine immediately agreed with the guy's reasoning and said that she had an idea of who exactly they were talking about. In her head, the heroine was thinking about who this new girl was and why she was next to the Count, because she didn't look like a knight, and she was also quiet. Bernard himself began to take Miel with him everywhere since that last conversation, even at audiences at the Imperial Palace and during training sessions of knightly squads. The Count also began to trust the main character with his personal affairs, for example, to answer all the delivered letters. Miel was very happy about this and happily took on everything Bernard said. Her colleagues, on the contrary, did not like it because they only got strange assignments, and they tried to turn the girl against the Count, saying that they would not even promote her for this, But the heroine was satisfied with everything. After all, Miel saw that Bernard treated her in a special way and she didn't need more, although she didn't understand why he took her with him absolutely everywhere. As a result, lost in thought, the girl did not notice the column on her way and, at walking speed, crashed head-on into it. Seeing this, the Count asked Miel to be more careful, to which the heroine agreed and apologized. A man named Alfred, watching from the window, asked the assistant if Bernard was with Catherine again, to which the assistant suggested that he was not. Getting up from his chair, the man immediately asked who it was, since there were no women listed as knights except for Catherine, but the young man reminded him that the girl from the administration had also spoken about her. After these words, Alfred immediately understood that they were talking about a shadow employee and concluded that Catherine was much simpler. After a few minutes of thought, Miel recognized the girl and called her by name, to which Catherine immediately pounced on the heroine with claims that if she introduces herself by her name, then she should do it wisely. Miel was very scared and answered in a trembling voice that she did not understand what was being discussed. But the knight did not believe her because the rumors had already reached the girl for a reason, and it was impossible not to react. The main character continued to look at him in confusion, not knowing what to answer. From the frightened look on Miel's face, Catherine realized that she was telling the truth and began to explain that everyone was saying that the commander had appointed Catherine as his escort. And when the heroine repeated that she knew nothing about it, the knight concluded that they were confused because she was the only girl among the knights and everyone immediately thought of her. Hearing this, Miel immediately began to apologize because she thought that it hurt Catherine, but the heroine immediately made it clear that everything was fine. And the knight added that such a reaction was caused by the fact that she was sure that the main character knew about all the gossip. Catherine thought that Miel was deliberately not saying anything so that she could continue to use her name. Under the night sky, the girls settled all misunderstandings, and the knight added that now she knew why they were so interested in the heroine. Miel didn't even know this, and Catherine explained to her that it was one thing when a commander appointed someone from the administration as an assistant. But continuing, the heroine said that it was the first time the Count had been accompanied by a girl, and these words again came as a surprise to Miel. After these words and understanding everything, including the interest of others, Catherine laughed, but the main character herself only tensed up. The knight only needed one look at the girl to calm down and understand that Miel was not laughing. And Catherine immediately had a picture and thoughts in her head that everyone sees the main character as prey. That's why the girl said that if anyone else mentioned this, the heroine should go to Catherine in the Night Corps and she would quickly put everyone in their place. And while Miel continued to stand there, trying to understand what was going on, the knight invited her to dinner and was glad that she finally had a friend here. The main character remained silent, and only after the question about the agreement, the girl realized that they were now friends and agreed to lunch. Allison had been watching the ladies from the window the whole time and smiled, seeing that the heroines got along well. But the young man was distracted by the Count, who warned him about leaving and asked him to finish the remaining papers. The guy accepted the task, and having started to study the documents, he noticed Miel's handwriting, and he immediately turned to the commander with a question about the fact that recently the Count had begun to trust the heroine with personal assignments, and whether this meant that the young man had other reasons for this. Bernard looked at the young man and chose to pause before answering. After a moment of silence, the Count began to explain that now he needed someone who could be quiet, who didn't care what others said, and who did the job without asking unnecessary questions. After all, public unrest has not yet died down, and some people still want to see Bernard as Count, despite the fact that William is doing an excellent job of fulfilling his duties. And even during the war, the commander tried to be just a shadow of the family so that power would go to his brother. The young man believed that he would never become a count and added that this was precisely why he needed someone who knew his job and would not break down at the right moment. Bernard needs someone who knows his place and can be relied upon. The last words surprised Ellison very much, and he asked again, but the Count, heading towards the exit, only repeated the request to sort out the remaining papers and be more careful. Time flew by in the capital, and 5 years had already passed since the main character moved. Everything was fine, but one late evening, Catherine arrived at Miel's house in a panic, thereby frightening the whole family. The heroine immediately asked the knight what had happened, to which the girl apologized for arriving late and said that they had an urgent meeting. When asked further by Miel, the red-haired girl simply made it clear that the reason for the meeting was William. The young man lay on the ground in the forest with a broken head and no longer showing signs of life. Bernard, as soon as he found out, immediately arrived at the scene of the tragedy and ran to his dead brother and his mourning wife. The hysterical woman asked the lifeless body what she should do now and live on, while the worried young man ran up and began to find out what had happened. But in response, Bernard received only aggression and accusations from the widow, who said that if it weren't for the horse that the young man gave her, everything would have been fine. These words made the commander break out in a cold sweat, and he was unable to answer. Despite the death of the Count, the victory holiday was not cancelled, and residents actively celebrated it on decorated streets. The main character walked home tired, thinking that there had been a lot of work these days, and now the girl was finally almost finished. And while Miel was still thinking that today's plan to leave work early had failed, Allison, walking behind her, called out to her. The heroine was a little scared but greeted the young man, and he asked if the girl was going home. To this question, Miel immediately began to apologize and justify her late departure, but Allison asked the heroine to stop because he should be the one asking her for forgiveness. And the young man continued, saying that the funeral coincided with the celebration of Victory Day, so the administration had a hard time, but the girl replied that everything was fine and she was used to it. The only people the main character worries about are the Count and the knights. After all, a month ago, Count William died tragically after falling from his horse, and everyone, especially the knights, were shocked by this news. At one time, the knights had to prepare for the oath to the new count and the celebration of the Victory Day, and only after long days filled with work, many managed to let go of their grief. But it was not the newly minted count that the main character was most worried about. When Miel brought the report to Bernard and told him about it, the young man, continuing to look out the window, simply said to leave it on the table. And the girl, seeing that the young man was not well, was very upset by this state and silently did what was said. But seeing the mess on the table, the main character could not resist and suggested cleaning up, to which the Count, just as half-heartedly, told the girl to make the decision herself. It is no exaggeration to say that Bernard has lost his purpose, having dedicated his entire life to helping his brother rule these lands. But now William is gone. Miel understood all this and therefore was worried, but Allison said that there was no need to worry so much because the Count was already feeling better. The young man also added that Bernard was going to the annual banquet at the Imperial Palace today, but the girl was not at all happy about this because she did not see any improvement in the Count's condition, and the heroine asked why the young man was not at the banquet now, to which the guy replied that he still needed to bring documents to the commander. But the girl offered her help, and after agreement, she immediately took the documents to the office. Allison, watching them go, remembered the Count's words about him needing someone who could be quiet and knew his place. At this time, Miel was running and thinking that if something similar had happened to Dennis or Selena, the girl would never have survived this grief. But the main character also understood that one cannot grieve forever, and she would have wiped away her tears and continued living, even knowing in advance that things will definitely never be like before. Having reached the office, Miel's thoughts switched to how she could support Bernard, but the heroine did not expect to see the Count himself there. The girl froze a little at the door from shock, but found the strength to call out to the young man questioningly. The Count looked silently towards Miel, waiting for further words or actions. But the main character was very scared and began to apologize because she thought that the office was empty, and Bernard simply asked about the purpose of the visit at such a late time. The girl immediately explained that she came to bring some papers, and the Count, without further ado, said to put them on the table. Miel approached the workplace and was surprised by the order, but her first thought was that the heroine could have cleaned it herself, but the young man did it. But the girl didn't dwell on this too much and asked Bernard why he wasn't at the banquet. The young man replied that he had heard all sorts of nonsense there and decided to leave early. Miel only had the Count's condition in her head and whether he had gotten any better. But the girl decided to apologize for the mess she made on the table, and the young man had to clean it up. Bernard understood that Miel was having a hard time with Allison, so he didn't see a problem with cleaning and said so. The main character replied that everything was fine, thinking that she wanted to try and be strong for the Count. After these words, the girl said that she was going home and headed towards the exit. In fact, Miel was a little upset, because she understood that no matter what she did, she would still remain just a subordinate for the Count. And the girl continues to try only to tell herself that she is not giving up. Therefore, even if for Bernard the heroine will remain invisible forever, and even if the young man never reciprocates Miel's feelings, the girl will be satisfied with what she has now. But 6 months later, Count Bernard proposed to the main character to marry him. And the young man was very happy and thanked the girl for agreeing to be his wife. Then the young man added that he understood that he was asking a lot from the heroine, but the young man was counting on her very much. The girl replied that the Count could rely on her without a doubt. After these words, Bernard decided to explain everything, because the young man didn't just tell her about his plan and wanted the heroine to know what would happen next. And the Count's plan was to announce to everyone that he had fallen head over heels in love with Miel, and having lost his head from love, proposed to the girl, so now Bernard plays the role of a lover. At the end, the young man added that from this moment they were lovers, and these words greatly embarrassed the heroine. While having lunch on the street, the girl thought about how lovers behave. Miel thought all couples were cute, holding hands and kissing, but just from her fantasies, the heroine already considered herself a criminal and did not know what to do about it. Trying to get out of her thoughts, the girl did not understand how she could not imagine such a thing at all now, but on the other hand, it was very difficult for Miel to imagine the Count as gentle. Suddenly, Catherine called the heroine, asking about Miel's alone gatherings, and thus helping the girl come to her senses. The knight noticed the main character's concern and immediately asked about it, assuming that the girl was being pestered again. And then Miel jumps up enthusiastically and denies her friend's thought. The girl began to tell in a rush of emotion that she was going to marry her boss, because yesterday the Count proposed to the heroine. But Miel also immediately explained that it was all fictitious, since Bernard needed this marriage to avoid an engagement with the princess. At one point, the main character begins to hear someone calling her in the distance. All this time, Catherine was trying to bring the girl to consciousness, because everything before this was just imagination, and in fact, Miel sat silently and ignored her friend. When the main character finally paid attention to the girl, she immediately asked what happened and began to feed Miel, because she thought that she needed to eat more. Seeing Catherine's concern, the heroine looked at her with love, and again began to think about everything that was happening. After all, if Miel marries the Count, she will become a countess, and it will no longer be so easy to communicate with her friends. But the main character values Catherine and their friendship very much, so she doesn't want this to happen. And for the marriage, all the documents will have to be restored, which means the creditors will find Miel. At this time, Catherine asked the heroine to share her thoughts, as she saw that she could not relax, but the girl apologized and said that she would tell everything later. At the end of the working day, everyone went home except Miel, and so one of the colleagues asked the girl to do a task for him, to which the heroine immediately agreed. But hearing the departing boys greet the Count, Miel turned to the source of the sound. The young men became very tense and asked Bernard about the purpose of the visit, and the girl herself was also surprised because the young man spoke about other plans and was supposed to be in another place. The Count replied that he came for personal reasons, and the guys could breathe a sigh of relief. The young man then continued, clarifying that he had come for his beloved and thereby shocked everyone present. The employees immediately began discussing among themselves Bernard's partner and how long the young man had been in a relationship. Miel now understood what was meant by the Count's words about playing at being lovers. And while everyone stood in a stupor, the young man approached the main character and said that it was time to go. After these words, the girl stood up and at the same second received signs of attention from the Count, from which everyone again stood with their mouths open. And Miel herself was all red from the unexpected straightforwardness of the young man. But Bernard didn't stop there and told the girl that she could no longer hide the relationship and tell everyone because they had been together for 3 years and would soon get married. Everyone present almost lost consciousness from these words because they couldn't even accept the news about the relationship, and now they were also told about the wedding. Then the Count asked to understand the situation, saying that Miel had been absent-minded in recent days, and that was why she had not said anything, and added that no one should dump their work on the girl, and thus shamed one of the employees. At this point, the young man finished and called Miel, but noticing that the heroine was wearing only her uniform, he asked if she had a coat. The main character was a little confused, but replied that she had not worn any outerwear today. The Count, hearing this, immediately took off his cloak and put it on Miel, saying that it was chilly outside today. And after, the young man explained to the girl that it was too late and they really had to go, and the heroine, although she agreed, was thinking about how she could stay on her feet with such attention from the Count. Before leaving, Bernard praised everyone else and asked them to be more careful on the way home, but the employees had no time for this. A few minutes after the couple left, Catherine ran into the office and, thinking that Miel was still at work, invited her to dinner. But then she noticed the boys' faces and asked what happened. The young men immediately pounced on her with questions about whether the girl knew about Miel's relationship with the Count, but the heroine herself was in shock and could say nothing except counter-questions. On the street, the Count and the main character walked silently, without saying a single word. But the girl was worried that Bernard was too close and a little more, and the young man could hear her heart beating wildly, so the heroine asked if they could stop pretending. At these words, the Count told Miel to look out the window that looked out of the office of the first department. There, behind the glass, a whole crowd was watching the guys, still in shock. So Bernard told the main character to keep pretending until they reached the carriage. Miel herself thought about how often they would play lovers and whether it would be every day. And despite the fact that the girl understood that this was all untrue, her heart thought otherwise and continued to beat violently. After all, the heroine never stopped dreaming and hoping for mutual feelings. Having reached the transport, Miel said goodbye, but the man continued to hold the girl, to which she looked questioningly at the Count. And the young man replied that he could not let his beloved go home alone at such an hour, so he would go with her, and these words surprised the heroine. The Count, looking at Miel's red and shocked face, began to worry about the girl's condition. After an awkward pause, the main character headed to the carriage, but Bernard asked her to wait. And holding out his hand, the young man explained that the carriage was a bit high, so he wanted to help. Miel felt awkward, but after a few seconds, the heroine extended her hand in response and thanked the young man. At this time, all the employees were discussing the latest news, and many did not understand how they hid it so well. Someone thought about how the imperial family's attitude towards the Count changes because the heroine crossed the princess's path, and Catherine realized that this was exactly what Miel had wanted to tell her during lunch. But the young man distracted the girl in order to find out the Count's opinion about the wedding and the relationship in general, because he believed that these two were not at all suitable for each other. These words did not please Catherine at all, and she looked sternly at the guy. But the knight decided to restrain herself and sweetly replied that the feelings of the Count and Miel were much more important than the girl's opinion. And then she threatened the young men with her fist, telling them to repeat the same thing, but in front of Bernard, and the guys immediately ended their discussions. In the end, everyone thanked each other for their work and went home. From the moment Miel and the Count got into the carriage, no one said a word. There was complete silence. And analyzing everything that was happening, the girl realized that before this, Bernard had really only been pretending. Therefore, if everything continues like this, the young man will definitely guess that the main character is not indifferent to him. While Miel was lost in her thoughts, the Count decided to break the silence and ask the girl if she had told her brother and sister about the wedding. The main character has not yet decided to tell this news to the younger ones and answered negatively, to which Bernard said that his parents also didn't know anything yet, but added that it was better not to hide anything from the family, and also asked the girl to behave as naturally as possible. After listening to the Count, Miel thought about the reaction of Selena and Dennis, because they always supported their sister in everything, and it would be great if they were happy now. But Bernard again interrupted the heroine's thoughts with a request not to worry about her brother and sister, since now they would have enough money not only for life, but also for their studies. And the girl, out of excitement, thanked the young man twice, assuming in her head that the Count had noticed how worried she was about the younger ones. Their awkward dialogue was interrupted by the coachman, who asked again the address they were going to. Bernard confirmed that everything was correct, but the man said that the road was too narrow and they would have to get off because the carriage would not pass. To which the Count replied that it was okay and they would walk, and this shocked the girl because she thought that she would return home alone. And even when the boys were on their way home, the heroine considered it impossible for Bernard to want to be in such a place and apologized for living here. The Count was starting to get a little angry about this, and he said that since they were pretending to be in love, there was no need to apologize so often. After all, the most observant would immediately suspect the couple of deception, and Miel, again asking for forgiveness, said that she understood everything. After these words, the young man asked the heroine to take him to her home, and the girl, in shock, again did not understand anything and could only ask again. Bernard replied that he wanted to meet the heroine's family, and only now did Miel realize that the Count was coming to visit them. But to be completely sure of this conclusion, the girl looked towards the carriage, which was indeed already leaving. Then Miel told the young man which direction to go and added that the journey would take at least 2 hours. The young man was surprised, but accepted this fact and said to lead the way. Already at home, the main character, as usual, announced her arrival, and a joyful Selina immediately ran out to her with hugs. But when she noticed the Count, the girl froze in surprise and couldn't even say hello. But Miel Selina immediately bombarded her with questions about who was with her, and Bernard himself stood very tired in the aisle and was barely able to greet the younger one. While the heroine was explaining and apologizing to her sister for the unexpected guest, Dennis returned from work and also asked about the Count. The brother was very unhappy with the news of the marriage, because the girl came home at night and the younger ones looked after the house, because the sister was always working. And then it suddenly turns out that the main character had time to go on dates and get married. Miel sat in shock from the realization that the guys really didn't like the news, but the Count explained the girl's late arrival as an affair at work. And this also caused misunderstanding among the children, because they realized that they had not seen any changes in their sister's behavior. Bernard assumed that the younger ones were against the wedding because they were afraid that Miel would distance himself from them, and wanted to reassure them by saying that this would not happen. But Dennis started swearing again, because he was misunderstood, and the heroine, having apologized to the Count, called her brother for a talk. The first thing Miel did was ask Dennis for forgiveness and say that she regretted keeping it from them for so long, to which the guy, a little embarrassed, admitted in response that he also often ran off on dates. The main character immediately attacked her brother with questions, and the young man first began to tell, but almost immediately stopped, saying that it was not about him now. After all, Dennis wanted to explain that he knows a lot about relationships, and that it's immediately obvious when someone is having an affair. That is, such people take better care of themselves and smile for no reason, but Miel never behaved like that. And the young man asked about the main character's true desire to marry the Count. At this time, Bernard and Selina, left alone, sat silently and simply looked at each other. The young man remembered that after the war, it was very difficult for the girl to talk, and the boys are still children who need protection and care, but during this time the young man realized that it was not worth worrying about them so much. Having thought everything over, the Count asked Selina her opinion about the marriage and whether she was against it, to which the girl immediately shouted out that she was very happy about this news. This also shocked Bernard, because he expected a completely opposite answer. So the young man asked again, and Selina explained that she was happy because her sister was marrying such a great man and would finally be able to find happiness too. The Count understood everything, but while he was listening to the girl, the young man drank all his tea and put the empty container on the table. Selina noticed this and immediately ran to pour Bernard a new one, but on the way she broke the glass, which made the young man worried and immediately followed the sound. The girl began to apologize, and the Count sighed and realized that constantly asking for forgiveness is a family thing. And the young man simply began to collect the fragments, but he heard the conversation between Miel and his brother, namely the question about the desire to get married. The main character replied that she loved Bernard with all her heart and without a doubt wanted to be his wife. After such a confession, although not personal, the Count forgot about the broken glass and simply stood in front of the door. Dennis wasn't entirely surprised, because he immediately saw it on the girl's face and told her about it. Miel asked again, a little embarrassed, and realized that since her brother had noticed, the Count could have guessed too. In conclusion, the guy said that the most important thing to him is that the heroine is happy with her loved one. And Dennis also considered it necessary to apologize for getting worked up out of nowhere. After all, the young man knows that the Count is a good man, but he was simply worried about Miel, to which the girl replied that then he should ask Bernard for forgiveness too. After these words, the boys remembered that they had left their little sister alone and immediately ran to the table. The main character immediately began to apologize to the girl from the doorway as she was worried about the younger one's discomfort. But Selena and the Count were having a nice conversation and greeted the guys with a smile, and Bernard asked how the conversation went. Miel immediately realized that she had worried in vain because the girl and the young man seemed to be getting along well. Approaching the table, the main character asked the Count for forgiveness for having to leave him so suddenly, and the girl wanted to explain for her brother, but Dennis came into the room and said that he would tell everything himself. In fact, the guy was a little scared, but he found the courage to apologize for being rude and say that he couldn't hold back because the conversation turned to family. But the Count reacted calmly and asked for forgiveness in return, since it was he who had embarrassed everyone with his visit. This dialogue calmed the main character down, and in her heart, she was glad that everything worked out. And turning her attention to her sister, Miel asked about the wedding, and the girl just as enthusiastically answered that she was very happy and was already waiting for them to get married. The girl looked at the younger ones with trepidation, and although it was all a game, the heroine was silently glad that she had received their approval. And Dennis finally asked the Count to take care of Miel and make her happy. Having decided to walk Bernard home a little, the main character thanked the young man and apologized again for her brother. But the young man replied that Dennis could be understood, and, recalling Miel's confession, he quietly added that the girl could too. Then the Count decided to tell that when the heroine asked for a job, Bernard thought that she was a spy for Dagon, pretending to be a refugee. The girl did not like this opinion of herself, and she began to get indignant and shake her fist at the young man. The Count only smiled at this and suddenly expressed his assumption that he had been right then. But Miel didn't understand anything, and blushing, she asked Bernard what he meant. And the young man replied that the girl had done an excellent job with her role today. After these words, the heroine exhaled and thanked the young man. Before saying goodbye, the Count added that Miel should warn her brother and sister about moving to a new house tomorrow. Continuing, Bernard said that this could not be postponed, and the heroine needed to pack her things, because the young man would come for them tomorrow morning. But the girl just stood there and tried to understand what was happening. When the main character came to her senses and wanted to answer the young man, he had already finished and headed home. Miel tried to shout to the Count, but the young man only moved further and further away. Therefore, the girl had no choice but to simply accept the fact of the move and go pack her things. On his way home, Bernard caught the glances of passers-by who were actively discussing the appearance of a nobleman in a poor area. But the young man was indifferent to the words of people the youth thought only about his extreme fatigue. The chaotic day was followed by an equally chaotic morning, as the move had already begun. Miel still couldn't come to her senses, and Selena was surprised by the beautiful view from the window and the fact that they were in the most expensive area, Inyet Road. Dennis was so shocked that he even got a little scared and asked if they were going the right way, hoping that it was a mistake. But Allison, who was sitting opposite them, said that everything was correct and asked them not to worry, because they would be told everything upon arrival. Continuing, the young man said that first Miel and the children would be taken to their rooms, and then they would be shown the palace and breakfast would be prepared for the family. The main character felt very awkward because Inyet Road is the most luxurious area of the city. And no matter how much money a person has, it is impossible to simply buy a house here, since you need to belong to the very top of society, and Miel could not even dream of such a thing. But for the main character, all this was not a surprise, since a few hours ago, before the move, Allison told her everything, and even then the girl said that such a neighborhood was too much. The young man tried to calm Miel down by saying that it was only temporary, but he only made it worse. And the heroine said that she didn't think this was right, because she could calmly prepare for the wedding at home. Allison replied that he was also from a poor family, so he understood how the girl felt, but they chose this path themselves. Therefore, continuing, the young man said that Miel would get used to it, or rather, should get used to it. And to lighten the mood, Allison said that he also thought that Inyet Road was too much, but that wouldn't even occur to the Count, because for Bernard it's just a beautiful area. After these words, Miel smiled and agreed with everything the young man said, and realized that she definitely had to get used to it. At this time in the capital, a servant informed his mistress that the carriage was ready, to which she replied that they were leaving. But the young man inquired about the reason for the long stop in the capital, since they were originally going to Enal County. And the lady, putting on her hat, said that she remembered everything perfectly well, but there was a reason. After all, what mother would sit idly by when her son gets married, and the woman has to see Bernard's chosen one? Upon arrival at the palace, all three stood in a stupor and did not know how to behave properly. The family was greeted by head butler Daniel Wilson, who said that from that day on he would be assisting them. The young man also said that Miel and the younger ones would be in this estate for 2 months, and the heroine recognized the young man and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Daniel immediately beamed, as he didn't think the girl remembered him, since they had only seen each other briefly at William's funeral, and added that he was very pleased. Upon entering, the main character expressed concern about Daniel's presence with them, and not in the Arctus Palace, but the young man reassured her, saying that both were the Count's residences, so everything was fine. The younger ones stood nearby at this time and discussed what they would do if they got lost. Miel agreed with the children, but Daniel explained that compared to the Count's permanent residence, this estate was a small house and invited the family on a tour. The 10th room was already a small living room next to Selena's bedroom, so the young man added that she could safely invite friends here. To which the girl told about the lack of friends, but Daniel supported her, saying that now they will appear. And at this stage, the young man decided to ask Miel's opinion about the estate, and the girl replied that she was impressed by the scale and liked everything. After these words, Daniel wanted to continue the tour, but Selena said that her legs were already hurting a lot, so the butler decided to finish for now and called Miel into the office for documents. At first, the main character did not understand what was being discussed, but when she saw the application for admission to the Imperial Academy, she was delighted. But the young man immediately said that the children would first have to pass entrance exams, and the girl, having thanked him, began to hug the younger ones, sharing the joy. At that moment, Miel realized that life was getting better, and her brother and sister would study at the best academy in the Empire. Daniel interrupted the family's joy by adding that the main character would also be studying, causing the family even more shock. The butler did not keep her in suspense and explained that the girl would be taught etiquette because the Countess's manners must be impeccable and the heroine would have the best teacher. This teacher was called the Queen of Manners by everyone, and she too was Countess Arctus. And Bernard's mother, Eliza Arctus, combined all of this within herself. The woman shone brighter than the others in society, but after the death of her husband, she stopped appearing in it. And when Eliza's eldest son, Count William, died, she became a recluse, so she wanted to leave the capital and return to her parents' home in Enal County. Miel, upon learning this, immediately blushed because she understood that the woman remained in the capital only for her sake. And the girl said that she knew nothing about it, but the young man replied that it was logical because the decision was made in the morning. The main character began to get very nervous when she realized that her future mother-in-law would be the teacher. Miel immediately remembered Catherine's story about how her friend constantly quarreled with her husband because of her mother-in-law, because she always didn't like everything. And then the knight asked the girl if she had ever encountered something like this, but the heroine didn't even understand what he was talking about. And now, while Miel was panicking about the fact that her mother-in-law wouldn't like her either, there was a knock at the door. Daniel immediately went to open the door, warning the girl that it was most likely Eliza who had already arrived. After these words, the main character felt a cramp inside her and she couldn't move. But the young man did not wait, and saying that this was their first meeting, took Miel by the hand and joyfully ran to the door, while the girl herself was shaking with fear. While the two were running, Allison managed to meet Eliza, and the woman was surprised that the young man had already been appointed head of the guard, but the guy replied that he still had a lot to learn. Eliza thought it was stupid because she was good at understanding people, and the guy, in her opinion, was great at his job. At these words, Allison immediately smiled and thanked the woman for the compliment. Having finished with the greeting, Eliza asked the young man how her son came up with the idea of getting married, but they were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Miel, and as soon as the girl was allowed in, she again began to worry about the woman's opinion of her. And looking out, the main character could not say a word and simply stood silently in the passage. But Eliza, even without an introduction, understood that the girl was her son's bride. After the first step away from the woman, Miel finally said hello and, giving her name, said that she was glad to meet her, but was worried about her appearance because she was in a hurry to get to the meeting. Eliza herself liked everything, and seeing the heroine's worries, she took her hand and said that everything was fine, and then she also introduced herself. The main character saw that the woman was very kind and her fear instantly disappeared, so Miel immediately agreed to the offer of tea without further ado or thought. At the table, Eliza began to talk about how Bernard had told her about the wedding very unexpectedly. The Count said that they loved each other very much, and the woman could not even imagine that someone would love such a boor. After all, Eliza was sure that when it came to love, the young man did not know how to behave at all, but Miel immediately began to deny it and say that Bernard was very gentle with her. To which the woman said that she was glad to hear that at least around his beloved the young man behaved differently, since she always thought that her son would not let anyone into his heart. So Eliza thanked Miel and expressed her joy that Bernard had found himself a companion. The main character was grateful that the woman trusted her, but deep down she asked her for forgiveness because everything she said was a lie. After getting acquainted, Eliza suggests moving on to the essence of the meeting. Eliza suggests that Miel knows that she has come to teach her daughter-in-law etiquette, and Miel agrees. During her training, Miel will learn to walk and move beautifully and wear dresses. The Countess remarks that this may seem simple, and Miel has indeed always considered etiquette an easy science. However, in society, it is important to have etiquette, and this will not be easy, so Eliza asks if Miel is ready. Miel resolutely replies that she is ready and will try, after which they transgress. Meanwhile, Dennis and Selena try on new clothes, which makes Selena embarrassed and Dennis and Daniel fascinated by them. Returning to Miel, we find that she remembers her grandmother teaching her to recognize what opportunities she could take advantage of. After all, then no one will be able to deceive Miel, which no one would want. Life rarely offers good opportunities, and since Miel is overly kind, one may come her way, but with it there may be people who want to use her. Outside the memories, Daniel watches Miel's first lessons and pitifully asks Eliza if that's enough for today. He asks to pay attention to Miel, who has fallen to the floor from exhaustion due to lessons on beautiful walking. Eliza has been teaching Miel etiquette for a week now, and after they had learned dancing, table etiquette, tea-drinking etiquette, it became quite clear that Miel did not have natural grace. Miel is shocked because she still doesn't fully understand what this natural grace means. Eliza sighs regretfully because she initially assumed that Miel would have a hard time learning. Miel apologizes regretfully, but Eliza says that she has nothing to apologize for and that it is her son who is in too much of a hurry to get married. And although the daughter-in-law tries to protect the Count, Eliza asks her not to endure the inconvenience since they are no longer boss and subordinate. The future mother-in-law advises Bernard to be direct about everything that does not suit her, but Miel is surprised and wonders if all couples do this. Daniel asks if he should serve dinner, to which Eliza agrees. Eliza turns around with a kind smile and calls Miel to get ready for dinner. But the girl herself thinks that they are kind to her only because they are convinced that she is the Count's beloved. This kindness is only for Bernard's beloved, not for her, Miel Quarto. Miel comes to the conclusion that she is having such a hard time because she is in the wrong place. Thus Sir Ellison came to command the knights through his outstanding abilities. And her friend Catherine is always at the forefront of the battlefield, and, like Allison, she achieved her place through her own efforts. But Miel is different from them in this. Neither Eliza's kindness nor her rich estate rightfully belong to her because she is not the Count's beloved, but only plays a role. In her thoughts, Miel looks back at the self who achieved her position in the administration solely through her own efforts, and she thinks that she shouldn't have accepted all the gifts that new life brings her. Eliza and Miel have a nice conversation about dinner, but Miel herself thinks that she was chosen to be the bride by chance, and that she is where she is only because she happened to be in the right place at the right time. And now, although Miel smiles at kind Eliza, she worries about what will happen to her when it's all over. After dinner, Eliza and Miel walk around the estate and talk. They are already parting to rest after classes when the butler finds them. Eliza asks what happened and Daniel apologizes for bothering her. But he was in such a hurry to announce the Count's arrival that it terrified Miel. Eliza notes that it was rather impudent to show up at such an hour, but playfully glancing at her daughter-in-law, she says that she can't refuse him. After all, he hasn't seen his fiancée for a week, which Eliza kindly teases Miel about, and she is genuinely embarrassed. Eliza asks the butler to serve tea, and Daniel enthusiastically rushes to carry out the order. Miel is puzzled by what could have gotten into the Count and why he suddenly decided to pay a visit. She persistently reminds herself that the Count is only using her. Her grandmother told her about people who first look at you and then start tempting you. Be sure to offer something that a person cannot resist. Therefore, as her grandmother taught her, Miel should be more careful and vigilant, although she has nothing to lose anyway, and she is about to give in to temptation. Miel and Eliza wait in silence for the Count to arrive, but the future young Countess clearly feels oppressed. When finally there is a knock on the door, causing Miel to perk up and brighten up. Despite all the reminders to herself, despite all the warnings, she cannot resist the temptation to stay close to the Count. At that moment, the Count enters without waiting for permission to enter, and immediately finds Miel with his gaze. Miel, seeing the Count, thinks that she can still be deceived and bullied. Eliza scolds her son for entering without permission, but he ignores her and apologizes to Miel for coming so late. He gently holds Miel's hand and says that he knows how difficult it has been for her during this time. Miel is deeply shocked by his behavior, out of habit. The Count elegantly kisses his bride's hand, putting on a show in front of his mother. But Miel is still incredibly touched by this gesture. Her heart flutters, even though the Count plays the role of a fool in love. Eliza is struck by her son's gesture of affection as he inquires about Miel's well-being and affairs. Miel tries to keep the conversation going, while the Count gives her a look that hints to her to play the role of the bride more naturally. But the Countess intervenes in the conversation and forgives her son for his bad manners, taking into account that he missed his bride. The Count says that the time has come to announce the wedding, to which Eliza agrees. They don't have time to arrange a meeting in honor of the engagement, but the Count decides to gather journalists to introduce Miel to the public. Miel is terrified at the prospect of meeting journalists. She does not hold back and expresses her confusion and fear out loud. Eliza approves of the idea, but Miel is afraid of gossip after such a meeting. The Countess remains calm and says that rumors will happen no matter what, so it is better to control the situation and make supporters. People like love stories more than scandals, and the story of the Count who fell in love with a simple girl is just that. Miel has to awkwardly agree with these words. At the same time, she remembers that Selena also loves such stories, and Miel often read them to her. The Count argues that in order for the news to be well received by the people, it is necessary to give an official statement to journalists, which will save them from being slandered. As he says this, he casually places his hand on Miel's back, which again makes her incredibly embarrassed. Bernard reminds her that the meeting is for the common good and asks Miel not to let her down. Eliza hears this and is amazed by her son's commanding tone, as if she were still his subordinate and not his fiancée. She breaks through to point this out, but changes her mind and backs down. The Count asks to step aside to talk to Miel, while the girl notices the tense expression on the Countess's face. Eliza allows the couple to leave, but sternly asks Bernie not to pressure the girl. Bernard agrees indifferently and invites Miel to leave. And in Miel's head, her grandmother's words are heard again about how even if she has nothing to lose, people can still deceive her and then blackmail her. Her grandmother's words do not leave Miel's head, but she mentally turns to her with the conviction that the Count will not deceive her. Miel admits to herself that she is also using the Count, because she not only wants to repay him for his kindness, but also to get closer to him. Bernard takes her to another room and expresses his hope that Miel will be more careful in the future. She replies that of course it will be. Miel promises to try harder in the future. The next day, the first preparations began, including the restoration of the Quarto family coat of arms and title of nobility. Allison asks if the crest is restored correctly, which Miel confirms and thanks him for his work. Despite the forced smile, Miel cannot rejoice because the restoration of the title means the return of the collectors. Allison notices that Miel doesn't look happy, which she tries unsuccessfully to hide. Guessing that the essence of the worries lies in the debts, Allison reassures Miel and says that the amount is small and they will pay it off quickly. What surprises Miel is that her family has been trying to pay off this debt all their lives, and she even thinks about letting go of the situation and being happy about it. But it's too early to relax, and Allison says that Miel is waiting for the round table meeting. Miel tenses up again and becomes gloomy, which Elliot notices again. The Round Table meeting is a meeting of nobles, which consists of those of the class who do not want to leave the political arena. It is the duty of such nobles to compile an annual census of nobles, and their approval is required for Quarto to be included on the list. Allison warns that Miel will have to handle this alone, but the only thing she's worried about is a particular council member. After some time, Miel finds herself at a council, where she is immediately identified as the very same Shadow of the Count. The other nobles do not understand the nickname and ask about its origin. The man replies that this is the nickname of the girl who has accompanied Count Arctus for several years. This man turns out to be Marquis Romain, the same one who saw Miel next to the Count several years ago. He is surprised that Miel turned out to be from a noble family and mockingly remarks that Quarto had a lot of debts. The Marquis is the Emperor's elder brother, and he was not on the council for his exceptional qualities. Romain says that a nobleman's honor should not be tarnished by debts, but Miel replies that Count Arctus has already paid them. The Marquis mocks the Count and his willfulness, finding in Miel a good reason to make attacks on her fiancé. The meeting dragged on, and Miel left later than she had wanted. She is already in a hurry to return and prepare for a meeting with journalists, but they call her by the nickname Count's Shadow. Miel turns around to find the Marquis walking towards her. She gives him an indifferent look, not wanting to talk to this man any longer than necessary. Despite her feelings, she greets him politely, and the Marquis asks if the Count will restore the glory of Canheim. He sarcastically remarks that the Count cares about his people for a reason, but Miel knows that he is trying to show his superiority with his attacks. The Marquis harbored a grudge against the Count because of his son Cesario, who was aiming to become crown prince. The Count became a war hero who defended the country, while Cesario abandoned Canheim. Miel contemptuously thinks that because of this, Cesario was no longer considered for the role of crown prince, for which he was not suitable anyway. Meanwhile, Romain continues to laugh at the Count, who solves all problems with money. The Marquis presses on Miel and grabs her by the shoulder, saying that for her sake the Count refused the princess. He says that the Count likes quiet people like Miel more than strong-willed individuals like Princess Brunhilde. Miel freezes, holding back her rage. The Marquis assumes that Miel agreed to the wedding in order to pay off all her debts and is about to belittle her, but Romain is interrupted. Miel grabs his hand and coldly says that she doesn't understand the purpose of the Marquis's conversation, but she doesn't intend to speak ill of her superiors. She demands that he take his hands off her, piercing the Marquis with a steely gaze. The Marquis is furious at her rebuff. He angrily pulls his hand away and screams, accusing the heroine of her insolence. Romain is about to say something else derogatory towards Bernard, but he is interrupted by the Count, who arrived in time. He intervenes in the conversation and asks what the Marquis could possibly need from Bernard's subordinate. Miele is taken aback by Bernard's appearance and instantly softens, not taking her eyes off him. But Romain comes to his senses and yells at Bernard, declaring that he will not tolerate such disrespect towards himself. He claims that he wanted to help Miel, but she repaid him with ingratitude. Hearing this lie, Miel reproaches herself for her lack of restraint and worries that she is causing trouble for the Count. However, the Count does not listen to the Marquis's accusations and besieges him. He claims that Miel is not that kind of person, which is incredibly encouraging for the girl. Miel would never insult a superior, Bernard says, otherwise she would not work for him. Bernard gracefully questions the Marquis's words, taking the side of his assistant. The Marquis Romain is again speechless, after which he reminds the Count of his belonging to the imperial family and asks what is so special about the girl that they allow her so much. At this attack, Bernard protectively puts his arm around Miel's shoulders, and he announces that this girl will soon become his wife. Miel is shocked that the Count revealed their intention to get married in order to protect her. In a whisper, she asks Bernard why he told everything if they decided to keep the secret until they met with journalists. The Marquis continues to be overcome by anger, but this time he has nothing to say to Bernard or Miel. He turns around, throwing out words about how the Count and his bride will regret it, and then leaves them. The Count notices that the Marquis clearly intends to complain to the Emperor, which worries Miel, because the emergence of rumors around their wedding promises problems. But what worries Miel even more is how much the Count heard from their conversation with the Marquis, because if he had heard everything, he would hardly have stood up for her. Miel and Graf pause in awkward silence before deciding to prepare to meet with the journalists. But before they can leave, they are met by Allison, who is just looking for Miel. Allison's appearance makes Miel incredibly happy, as he saves her from awkwardness in Bernard's company. Allison is surprised by the presence of the Count, who is supposed to be at a meeting in another wing of the palace, but Bernard brushes it off. Instead, he asks Allison to reschedule the meeting with reporters for today. Both Miel and Allison are shocked by the abrupt change of plans, but they have no more time to argue. After some time, Eliza says with displeasure that her son is completely out of control. She was outraged that Bernard was changing plans so groundlessly, without regard for the difficulties and administrative situations. Miel, realizing that the change of plans happened indirectly because of her, worries and mentally apologizes to Eliza. But noticing her daughter-in-law's mood, Eliza asks her to relax and smile. After all, Miel is so beautiful today. Miel truly feels like she has never been as dressed up as she was before the meeting and finds herself beautiful. She is amazed that in just a few hours the maids performed such a miracle. Miel is still uneasy about having servants help her with her grooming and toilet, and wonders if it will be like this every day. Daniel arrives to make sure his mistress is ready, but is distracted by how delicious she looks. He calls his mistress the most beautiful of all, and he wonders if Miel intends to make the Count fall in love with her again, but Eliza reprimands the butler for his lack of manners, despite agreeing with his compliments. Miel touches her face in surprise, wondering if the Count could really fall in love with her. Could he notice her with that dress and her new look? Seeing her daughter-in-law's anxiety, Eliza encourages her, asking her not to worry and just be herself. Miel smiles gratefully at her future mother-in-law, promising to try harder. Meanwhile, the Count is waiting for Miel in front of the doors to the conference hall. Miel hurries to meet him, worried that the Count had to wait a long time for her. The Count remains indifferent to her transformation and dryly informs her that they are delayed, so they should hurry. Miel is a little hurt by the Count's cold attitude. Because of the words of the Countess and Daniel, she believed that Bernard might actually find her beautiful, and her faint hope was destroyed. Miel comes to the conclusion that she expected too much from the Count and follows him. At the meeting, Bernard announces his marriage to a low-born girl, which obviously upsets the journalists. But for them it was a sensation, so Miel was bombarded with questions. Some of them concerned the debts of the Miel family, but the Count brushed aside all the inconvenient questions. Miel felt safe under his protection, but she was worried that the Count's defensive reaction would provoke the journalists. Out of the corner of her ear, she hears the whispers of journalists, arguing that the Count must really be in love. Miel can't believe she can't hear it. She is deeply surprised that those around her actually believe that Bernard has lost his head in love with her. Miel wonders dejectedly what they think of her then. Towards the end of the meeting, one of the journalists asks the Count if he is rushing into the wedding. After all, not even half a year has passed since the death of Count William. The journalist's question throws Bernard off his feet, and he even loses the power of speech. The journalist asks what the Count intends to answer, and Miel watches the groom with concern. There are many rumors surrounding the death of the late Count, as well as the internal problems of the Arctis family, which makes the announcement of the wedding seem like an attempt to distract attention. Miel is amazed that a journalist can ask such tactless questions. The rest of the journalists listened attentively, and some looked anxiously into the Count's face. Others eagerly awaited his sensational comments. But only Miel saw that Bernard had the same expression on his face as he had in the first days after his brother's death. The journalist was about to continue to pester the Count with questions, but Miel pointed out that he was crossing the line. The Count comes out of his mournful stupor when he hears her. He looks back at Miel in surprise, not expecting her decisive intervention. Miel firmly points out that the imperial investigation has already issued a conclusion, and raising this issue for the sake of sensation is going too far. Miel's answer leaves the journalist speechless in shock. Despite his grin, he admits Miel is right and apologizes. Daniel stands up to declare the meeting with the journalists over if they have no questions left. Miel breathes a sigh of relief, realizing that it's finally all over. However, Bernard cannot move away from the situation and continues to look at Miel in amazement. She turns around and asks if he's okay. But the Count still can't find what to answer her and only looks at her as if he saw a completely different person in Miel. Bernard's thoughts return to the incident that happened a few hours earlier. The Count says goodbye to the man he met at the palace and wearily lowers his tie. He thinks sadly about how difficult it is to be a count and that leading knights suits him better. Remembering that Miel is due to attend a meeting of the Round Table that same day, he assumes that the Marquis will start a quarrel again. The Marquis and his men have a grudge against the Count, and Bernard begins to wonder if Miel can withstand his onslaught alone. However, he immediately decides that it does not matter because the Marquis's stubbornness will not affect the restoration of Miel's status. He decides that he shouldn't worry and intends to leave. But Bernard ends up in another wing of the palace, waiting for Miel to return from the meeting. The girl is late, and the Count does not understand what she can do if the meeting should have ended long ago. Deciding that there is no point in waiting for her, he decides to return to the estate and instead prepare for the next meeting. And he changes his mind after overhearing someone else's conversation in which Bernard's name is mentioned. Recognizing the Marquis in the invisible voice, Bernard decides to find out who they are talking about him with, after which he discovers that Roman is talking to Miel. The Marquis dismissively tells Miel that she probably agreed to the Count's proposal in order to pay off her debts and her title. Hearing these insults, Bernard intends to go out and intervene in the conversation, but his attempt is drowned out by Miel's voice. Bernard watches in amazement as Miel acts contrary to his expectations and responds to the Marquis's rudeness. There was no fear in her at all, and she looked her opponent straight in the eye. In both that situation and in front of the journalist, there was no shadow of doubt in her voice, as if she had nothing at all to fear. Although before this, the Count was sure that such a weak and quiet girl did not know how to fight back. And now he did not understand why she agreed to marry him if she had the strength to resist others. After the divorce, she will not be able to live in luxury, nor will she be able to return to her previous life. The stigma of being a former countess will remain with her forever. The Count was convinced that Miel knew about this as well as he did, but then why does she take his side and defend him? Although Bernard admits that he expected to find an ally in her, the fact that she goes along with this of her own free will gives rise to completely different thoughts and ideas about what kind of person Miel is. Disturbed by his thoughts, the Count decides not to think about it, concentrating on fulfilling his duty to his brother and protecting the Argus lands. Bernard's heavy thoughts are interrupted by their main character, Miel. The Count was expecting her, and Miel apologized for the delay. Bernard notices that Miel is wearing her work uniform again and asks her about it. Miel sheepishly explains that the dress was damaged, which is why she had to wear this one. Her maid accidentally spilled tea on the prepared clothes. Miel apologizes, knowing that the uniform looks ridiculous in the current situation, but Bernard just laughs and says that she has something to apologize for. Bernard is happy that he finally sees in front of him the Miel he knows. He smiles at her sincerely and kindly, for the first time since they met. Before leaving, Bernard thanks Miel for what she did for him today. Miel remains alone in the office, deeply shocked by the Count's strange behavior. The girl is embarrassed and confused because the Count did not even bat an eyelid when he saw her in a dress, but suddenly smiled at her now and even thanked her. But she was still deeply touched because he smiled at her, and this smile was sincere. Meanwhile, a large reception is being held at another estate. A handsome young man politely inquires about the affairs of his guests, sitting arm in arm with a gorgeous girl. But despite the politeness he shows, he hardly listens to the words of his interlocutors. He is irritated that after losing his title as Crown Prince, he is addressed as nothing less than Lord, and wonders why he is surrounded by such idiots. He thinks evilly of Bernard because of whom he lost his high status. Suddenly, a butler approaches him and informs him that the Marquis Roman, his father, has come to see the young man. A young man named Cesario indifferently assumes that the Marquis has gotten into debt again and asks to be brought. But the butler claims that the Marquise has come with a delicate conversation concerning Count Argus, which interests the man. Later, Cesario laments that the Count's marriage was not worth such secrecy, and when confronted about his disrespectful tone towards his father, he replies that to have a different tone, one must be a good father. He wonders what is so significant about this news, other than the fact that the Emperor might be upset to learn of the break in his engagement with the princess. To which Marquis Roman declares that Bernard has now discovered a great weakness. Cesario is surprised by his father's confidence, and he listens. The Marquis describes Miel as a smug and impudent civil servant who has completely deprived the Count of his head. And this is a great chance for Cesario to start acting, because isn't he a master of his craft? Cesario smiles predatorily at his father's words. He becomes curious about this woman Bernarda is, around whom there is so much noise. The next day, the front pages of the newspapers were filled with articles about the Count's wedding, among which, to Miel's relief, there were no articles that discredited his honor. But instead, many articles came out defaming Princess Brunhilde, and it is one of these that the indignant Catherine reads. She is angry that they make Miel look like an enemy of the princess, although the knights believe that they are actually rivals for the Count's heart. Catherine says with indignation that everything is not at all as it seems. The idea of the engagement of the Count and the princess belongs to the imperial family, but the princess herself did not participate in this process. The knights, convinced that there was an affair between the Count and the princess, are surprised by this. But Catherine demands that her comrades ignore these articles because they exaggerate the situation, making Miel look guilty. One knight notes that no one blames Miel, but it is still her fault because she will soon become the Countess. Catherine agrees with a sad smile. The knights say that Catherine was very close to Miel and would probably be upset when she distanced herself or even become jealous. The red-haired one is outraged by this statement, although the knights do not stop chatting about how the change of status will affect Miel's life, although the nobles have not yet accepted her. Catherine is sad, but still thinks that Miel was and will remain her friend, no matter how life changes. Meanwhile, at the estate, the maids help Miel prepare for breakfast, to which Eliza has invited her. When Miel asks where the breakfast will take place, Daniel replies that it will be held at the Arctis residence. Miel nervously thinks that she expected this because this invitation from Eliza is not at all ordinary. Daniel begins to worry, believing from the lady's face that she does not want to go, but she reassures him, realizing that she has no choice. Because the upcoming breakfast is a public endorsement of Miel as a daughter-in-law, and there is no turning back. While Miel is getting ready, one of the maids named Avery sheepishly asks her mistress about the morning articles, and he wonders if it is true that the Count preferred the lady to the princess herself. Miel is surprised not only by the question, but also by the fact that the morning articles actually said that. The other maids shout that it is impolite of Avery to ask such a thing. She instantly feels ashamed, and Avery apologizes to Miel for being rude. The girl involuntarily notices that the young servant is the same age as her sister Selena and asks the others not to scold her. But she kindly advises to be careful in future statements about the princess. Touched and relieved, Avery promises to be careful. Miel herself recalls that the articles have already been published and is afraid to read them. She wonders if the princess is very angry about their upkeep and sighs heavily. After some time, the maids, left alone, discuss the morning's incident and find Miel's attitude very sweet, as does Miel herself. They admire the kindness, hard work, and politeness of Miel and her family, and notice a warmth from her that would normally come from a fellow servant rather than a mistress. The brunette asks if the second one means that being a countess is not right for her, to which she disagrees, and says that she should be careful with her words. The second one in turn asks if her friend, like Miel, would like to fall in love with a rich man and live like in a fairy tale, which she sharply denies. The maids want to sincerely rejoice for Miel and wish her happiness, because she is much closer to them than the unknown princess. Meanwhile, Eliza meets her daughter-in-law who has arrived. She invites her in, assuming that Miel must have been preparing for this meeting all morning. Eliza apologizes to Miel for the early invitation, but her daughter-in-law expresses understanding because the Countess has a responsibility to the people. However, Eliza says it's not just about the official part. She wanted to thank Miel for what she did at the meeting yesterday. Miel modestly replies that, as the Count's beloved, she should have reacted, but Eliza objects that Bernard should have responded himself. People still doubt the cause of William's death, suggesting either the intervention of the Emperor or spies. While Bernard distinguished himself in the war, his older brother William had nothing to boast about. Therefore, many assume that Bernard was responsible for his death, who was blinded by the thirst for the title and removed his opponent from the path. Eliza finds these theories ridiculous, but Bernard did not stop the rumors, because he himself believed in his guilt in William's death. Lord William died as a result of a fall from a horse belonging to Bernard, which was the only strange coincidence. Although it is too much for Miel to ignore the accusations of her brother's murder, she still believes the Count and does not want to hurt him by mentioning the tragedy. Eliza sighs as she notices Miel's tension and assumes that she doesn't want to continue the topic any further. Miel hesitantly agrees, and the Countess apologizes for rushing things too much. The girl does not understand the last phrase, but Eliza is already distracting her with an offer to visit one place today. As Miel's companion, Eliza must prepare her for her appearance and also suggests thinking about her wedding dress. Miel remembers that the wedding is coming soon and she really still has to prepare her outfit, so she agrees. Eliza sadly reflects that in the future they will often appear together in public and all eyes will be on them. When Miel promises to be careful, Eliza sheepishly explains that she doesn't want to scare Miel, but to show that they have a good relationship. Miel is surprised by Eliza's words. The Countess quickly explains that she is not asking Miel to open up to her quickly because she is still getting used to it. But she asks to remember that from day one she thought of Miel as part of the family, and that's all she needs. For Miel, Eliza's words were a revelation, because before that she saw her mother-in-law's kindness as only a favor that should not be accepted. But now she understands that it is wrong to close herself off from Madame Eliza, and that despite the uncertain future, it is time for them all to get used to each other. We meet a fashion designer named Bellini from the street Aitra Rose, who was given the honor of making a wedding dress for the Count's bride. However, Bellini was frightened by the news of a bride who had outdone the princess herself and who turned out to be an ordinary civil servant. Although it sounded like a love story, Bellini was afraid that Countess Elisa would be against the marriage, and helping with the dress would bring down the wrath of her mother-in-law on the designer. Bellina's sad thoughts are interrupted by the shop workers, who inform her of Miel's invitation to dinner with Eliza. Moreover, the women arrived at the store together and they seem to be very close. Bellini, having seen her fears refuted, is incredibly happy and is ready to sew the perfect dress. The fashion designer greets the Countess, and Miel is worried that she doesn't understand anything about dresses and won't be able to choose the right one. She remembers the last time with the Count when choosing jewelry, where she was confused and could not do anything. Eliza points out the dress to Miel and asks her opinion, to which her daughter-in-law hesitantly replies that it is cute. From the meager answer, Eliza decides that Miel doesn't like the dress. Then Bellini comes to the rescue and they offer several fashionable dresses that highlight Miel's beauty. The women excitedly ask which of the ones they viewed appealed to the future Countess. But Miel continues to answer hesitantly that everyone is equally beautiful, and Elisa and Bellini are confused by her reaction. Miel becomes embarrassed and begins to worry, realizing that he is closing himself off from Eliza by not telling her the truth. She eventually admits that she doesn't know which dress to choose, after which Elisa asks Bellini to leave them for a while. Eliza says that Miel needs to learn a few things before entering family life. Namely, never apologize to anyone. Because Miel has nothing to apologize for and nothing to be afraid of, no one will judge her for the difficulties in choosing a dress. Wherever Miel is, she has nothing to apologize for, to Bernard or to anyone else. She and the Count are no longer boss and subordinate. They are equal to each other and must each share their opinion. They must discuss any problems and make decisions together, and speak out against injustice together. Respect and support each other. Hold your heads high and don't apologize if Miel understands that she has done nothing wrong. Miel thinks with disbelief that the words about respect and support apply to her and the Count, whom she is not yet accustomed to thinking of as an equal. The frank conversation between the Countess and her daughter-in-law is interrupted by Bellini, who has found a dress that Madame Quarto will definitely like. Miel, seeing the dress, realizes that this is what they were looking for. Meanwhile, in the Earl's office, Allison brings the morning newspapers, but Bernard brushes the articles aside, wanting to discuss more urgent matters. Sir Allison says that a budget needs to be worked out for the wedding, but Bernard is surprised because this should be done by a person from the administration, not the head of the guard. Allison looks at her master in surprise and asks if he really didn't know. Realizing that Bernard truly doesn't understand, Allison explains that Miel used to be in charge of budget allocation. Upon learning this, Bernard suddenly realizes that it is precisely because of Miel's absence that the administration is now in complete disarray. He knew that Miel took on other duties besides her main ones, but he was sure that this only concerned his assignments. And he thought that she had less work since Miel started working with him, but now Bernard knows he was wrong. From the big stuff like important meetings to the little things like gift lists, Miel took care of everything. It was only thanks to her that Bernard could fully immerse himself in his affairs, and the Count asks himself why he had not known this before. Bernard asks what his mother is doing, to which Allison replies that she must be with Mrs. Quarto on Itra Road. The Count is surprised because the best dresses are on Bennett Road, to which Allison replies that the Countess has begun preparing for the wedding since the best wedding dresses are sold on Itra Road. Preparing for a wedding requires a lot of effort, time, and preparation of every detail, from the guest list to the costumes. But since the preparation of events was usually done by servants, Bernard had no idea how to properly prepare for a wedding. He arrives at the very store where his mother and bride are supposed to be and looks around thoughtfully. His gaze falls on a rather revealing dress. Bernard imagines Miel dressed in it and thinks it would not suit her at all. Despite this, the Count is unusually confused by his own fantasies, and he is surprised by his thoughts. He turns away from the dress in embarrassment, convincing himself that Miel is just a subordinate and is carrying out his orders. The nervous Count is called out by Eliza. Eliza drinks tea and notices that her son arrived quite quickly. She asks if he wanted to talk about something or if this is just an excuse to see Miel, but the Count insists on talking. Eliza replies that the reason for Bernard's arrival is unimportant, because he arrived just in time. The Countess asks if everything is ready as Bernard sits down next to her. Bernard watches with excitement as Miel comes out to them dressed in a wedding dress. Bellini says they couldn't decide on the right dress, but this one fits just right. Miel, embarrassed by the close attention, appears before them, not yet noticing the Count's presence. Bernard is so captivated by her beauty that he involuntarily says Miel's name out loud. The girl sees the Count and blushes brightly with embarrassment, while Eliza cheerfully praises Miel's choice and asks Bernard's opinion. For a few moments he cannot utter a word. The Count's gaze is drawn to Miel's bare shoulders, and he wonders if this is too revealing. At that moment their eyes meet and both of them blush. Eliza asks Bernard not to embarrass his bride, but he is so embarrassed that he can hardly speak. He eventually gets over his feelings and tells Miel that the dress suits her very well. Eliza is pleased with her son's approval and asks if Miel herself likes the dress, and the girl quickly replies that she does very much. Then the Countess slyly asks if the Count likes it, but he answers in a strangled voice that Miel's opinion is more important. When Eliza suggests trying on another dress, Bernard immediately says that he likes the current one. He likes it very much. Miel is surprised by the changes the Count she knew would not have considered it necessary to spend a lot of time trying on dresses. But this time, for some reason, he behaved unusually, and Miel's heart fluttered and worried. Bernard decides to leave, but Eliza remembers that he originally came to talk, after which the Count announces that it was decided to allocate more money for the wedding. Eliza is happy about the news and asks the worried Miel not to worry about money and to boldly choose what she likes. Looking back at the dress that the Count had appreciated, she decides to take it. Time has flown by since then. Dennis and Selena entered the best academy, which lifts the weight off Miel's soul. He and Eliza began to appear in public more often and gradually stopped whispering about marriage. But Miel's balance is upset when she accidentally overhears a conversation between former colleagues in the administration. One of the workers suggests staging a marriage between Count and Miel because no one has heard anything about their relationship before. The young people notice Miel's appearance and become embarrassed and silent. She decides to pretend that she didn't hear anything, and when asked about her affairs, she answers that she came for her things and dismissal papers. They say goodbye, but Miel is left with an unpleasant aftertaste. Miel and Bernard were supposed to play lovers, but since the day of the dress fitting, the Count has not appeared again. There would be less talk and gossip if people had seen the Count with his bride at least once. The girl hoped that she and Bernard would go somewhere together, but why didn't he come to her? Miel is worried that she might have somehow given away her true feelings, and so the Count decides to end everything. But even if that were the case, Bernard would have told her about the termination of the contract, and most likely he was just very busy. So Miel decided to think better of business. She collected all the documents and cleaned out the old house on Tyne Road. Miel had made progress in mastering etiquette, and now her lessons with Eliza and the preparations for the wedding were complete. On the eve of the wedding, Miel lies awake, thinking that she never had a normal meeting with the Count. She thought about asking Ellison something, but she backed down for fear of arousing unnecessary suspicion, and now she regrets it. Miel hoped that the Count would visit her at least once, but tomorrow was their wedding, and she could not sleep from excitement. The girl decides to fall asleep at any cost and starts counting lambs. Without realizing it, she falls asleep and sees Bernard with ram's horns apologizing to her. Even in her sleep, Miel is confused. She asks the Count why he has horns, but he continues to apologize for not coming to see her because he has a lot of things to do. Bernard suggests that Miel is upset because she likes him, and the girl says that she is indeed upset. Even though the Count doesn't feel anything for her, they are playing a couple and can have a basic conversation. He asks if Miel will forgive him. The question echoes in her mind until the call of Daniel's butler breaks through her sleep. Miel woke up at breakfast in the company of Daniel, her brother and sister. The butler asks anxiously if Miel is feeling well. She reassures Daniel by explaining his thoughtfulness as anxiety. But she herself complains about her nerves, because of which she had a strange dream, which somehow came into her head. Selena watches her older sister with concern, as the others at the table chatter about Miel's worries. Finally, the sister asks if Miel is really getting married today, as if she can't quite comprehend it. Miel notices Selena's strange mood and asks what happened. She starts talking about her friends from the academy, who said that Miel, having married the Count, would become his kept woman. Selena fearfully asks if they will stop being a family when Miel becomes the Count's wife. Miel rushes to dissuade her, trying to find out what the children in the class told her. In her thoughts, she scolds herself for not noticing the feelings of the younger ones who have not gotten used to the changes, and says that they will remain a family forever. Selena says with tears that when she thinks about Miel's marriage, she realizes that she always took from her sister, but never gave anything in return. And now, Selena doesn't know if she'll ever be able to repay everything she did for her and her brother. Miel takes her sister's hands and thanks her from the heart. She says that she will accept everything from Selena and will be waiting for her to visit at any time. Selena will always be welcome at meals, because she and her brother will always be her family. The Cordo family embraces each other with tears in their eyes. The touching scene even brings tears to Daniel's eyes. But then he pulls himself together because it's time for Miel to get ready. Miel realizes that from this day on, everything will change completely. Her home, her life, her relationship with her brother and sister, and people's attitudes towards her change. How her relationship with the Count changes. The grand wedding ceremony begins. There are many guests in the hall, and the Count holds Miel tightly by the hand. Miel was sure that she wouldn't be so worried because she and Bernard hadn't seen each other for a long time, but everything turns out to be the opposite. Even Bernard notices that Miel's hands are shaking, but she reassures him that everything is fine. Miel is so scared that she can't lift her head and is glad that all her feelings are hidden by the veil. At the wedding, the front row attendees are Selena and Dennis on the bride's side, and Eliza and Allison on the groom's side. Catherine and the knights are also present at the ceremony and watch it with a light sadness in their hearts. Bernard, however, is closely monitoring the condition of his bride. He sees how her fragile hand, lying in his palm, visibly trembles. The Count feels strange seeing her so vulnerable, and perhaps he even thought of saying something encouraging to Miel. But in the end, he decides not to do this and wait until the end of the ceremony. The priest finishes his speech and pronounces Bernard and Miel husband and wife. Miel breathes a sigh of relief, thinking that the worst is behind her. She realizes that she stood the entire ceremony looking straight at the floor, and she is afraid that she may have mixed something up while she stood like that. The newlywed wife vaguely remembers that she didn't even greet the Count properly and was even rude to him, for which she should apologize. But before she can decide anything, Bernard removes the veil from her face. He whispers that the wedding is not over yet, without taking his eyes off Miel's face. She is so enchanted by him that embarrassment and excitement recede into the background. Bernard leans right down to Miel's lips and says that all that's left to finish is a kiss. Miel asks again in surprise, having completely forgotten about kissing, but Bernard reminds her that it is a mandatory part. The guests' gazes are turned towards them, and there is no way to do without a kiss without arousing suspicion. Miel swears her heart is about to jump out of her chest. The very thought of a kiss is confusing her thoughts. It all feels very much like a dream, especially when Bernard puts his hand on her neck and apologizes to her. He lowers himself to her lips, preparing to kiss them, and Miel freezes in excitement. Now the husband and wife finally kiss in the rays of the bright sun. Miel's embarrassment and excitement finally leave her, and she allows herself to drown in the feeling of love and tenderness, kissing her beloved. The excitement passed as if it had never been there, and the world around her seemed to disappear, and Miel wished time would freeze at that moment. After the ceremony, the Count suggests that Miel take a rest, taking it upon himself to say goodbye to the guests, but Miel is even happy about this. She was so tired after the wedding that she couldn't get a word out now. Besides, she was afraid that she would cross paths with former colleagues, and then everyone would feel awkward. Miel waits for the Count to return, but sleep overcomes her so strongly that it is almost impossible to resist, and she falls asleep. After some time, she hears Bernard's voice calling her name, and instantly wakes up from his voice. The girl is frightened by Bernard's unexpected appearance, but he ignores her fear and says that they have almost arrived at the residence. Miel looks around and is surprised to find that she is no longer in the waiting room where she fell asleep, but in a carriage. Bernard explains that he didn't want to wake Miel, so he carried her to the carriage in his arms. The newly minted Countess blushes and apologizes again for the trouble she caused, although the Count assures that everything is fine. Bernard says it must have been hard for Miel to prepare for the wedding alone, and she understands why the Count is so considerate. To assuage Bernard's guilt, she says that Eliza helped a lot with the preparations. As he gets out of the carriage, Bernard says that according to the rules he must introduce the new mistress to the servants, but they are both already very tired. So he suggests that they take care of everything tomorrow and welcomes Miel to her new home. Bernard's beauty and gentle attitude make Miel's heart beat faster. So at last they get out of the carriage, marking the overcoming of their first marital difficulty. Or so Miel thought until she found out they would have to sleep in the same bed. She shouts about it so loudly that Bernard asks her not to say out loud anything that will arouse the suspicions of the servants, and Miel is angry that the Count is not at all embarrassed. While in modern estates there are separate rooms for each person and spouses in addition to the common area. In old houses, only one bedroom was built for two people because that was the fashion at the time. Miel doesn't understand how this can be accepted at all. But the Count calmly invites her to lie down on the bed, while he himself occupies a small couch, clearly too small for him. Miel is horrified at the thought of Bernard having to huddle on a small couch, but he says there are no other options. Then Miel insists that she sleep in the chair, and then Bernard is horrified, not wanting to allow his wife to sleep in some chair. Miel begins to arguing that the Count, as the boss, is entitled to a bed, and Bernard quickly realizes that the argument is pointless. So first of all, he suggests that he and Miel take a rest and sets the table for dinner. Bernard says that the wedding took place largely due to Miel's efforts, which he greatly appreciates. The Count notices that she always works hard, and Miel suddenly understands what this dinner is like. Bernard raises his glass to Miel and says that he is counting on her in the future. Miel sees that right now they are not sitting at dinner, but at a corporate party. The girl wonders if the Count is always like this and if that is why she likes him so much. Bernard watches his wife sip wine, and he falls silent because he can't think of a topic for conversation. Miel decides to take matters into her own hands and starts a conversation about how, according to rumors, no one was received at the palace on the wedding day. Bernard says that the palace was closed for receptions, which sounds like a reproach, but he asks his wife not to think about it because there were no official statements, after which he jokingly says that they are newlyweds, so there is nothing to worry about. He asks Miel to rest at least today and says that the whole bed is at her disposal. She freezes, thinking of saying something to the Count, but instead he drinks more wine, deciding to keep his thoughts to himself. Bernard asks if Miel would like to know something about him, since if they knew more about each other, it would be easier to pretend to be husband and wife. He says it's okay if Miel has nothing to ask, but the girl has a whole volume of questions. However, there is one question that she is most interested in knowing the answer to. Miel asks decisively who Bernard would like to marry. Bernard is surprised by the question and even asks again. The girl realizes that she asked too bluntly. She quickly explains that their marriage is fictitious, and sooner or later the Count will want to get married for real, which is what interests her. But she becomes so uncomfortable with her own explanations that he slowly falls silent. The Count replies that he has never thought about such a question before. Bernard never thought he would ever get married, but he says that if it happens, he would like to marry someone like Miel, and the girl's heart soars for a moment. But in the end, she understands the Count's words as if their real marriage would not be much different from the fictitious one. She asks if Bernard really sees her as such a passive person, after which the Count says that she misunderstood him. Miel is quickly overcome by confusion and the intoxication of wine, and she blushes. And in disbelief, she asks again if Bernard really meant that he would marry someone like her. Bernard watches closely, realizing that Miel is behaving rather unusually, and he quickly realizes that the girl is already drunk, although she denies it, so he decides that it's time for both of them to go to bed. Bernard finally settles down on the couch and tries to fall asleep. Miel went to bed, but she couldn't force herself to fall asleep. In the end, she can't take it anymore, and of course, still drunk, she lifts Bernard up. She asks him to go to bed in the most uncompromising manner. Bernard asks, slightly irritated, if Miel has always been so stubborn. He is about to argue because a normal husband would not allow his wife to sleep anywhere, but Miel gets ahead of him and suggests sleeping together. His wife's unexpected and bold proposal makes the Count blush, and he asks again. Miel says that there is enough room on the bed for two, and that the servants should not know that the spouses sleep separately, and again demands that they lie down in bed. Drunk and very cute, Miel looks charming, so Bernard can't resist her for long. Apparently wanting to calm the Count down, Miel promises not to pester him, to which Bernard sighs in defeat and gives in. Bernard is surprised that Miel gets drunk so quickly, after which she finally lies down calmly and falls asleep immediately. However, the Count himself is now tormented by the inability to sleep. At some point, he sits up and calls Miel, wanting to tell her something. However, Miel is already fast asleep and does not hear him, and a strand of hair fell onto the sleepy girl's face. Bernard reaches out to her face, trying to brush away the hair that's in the way. But at the last moment, he changes his mind and squeezes his hand. He watches the sleeping Miel thoughtfully, trying to understand the new feelings that this girl awakens. The next morning, Miel wakes up with the realization that she did not sleep alone that night. Bernard, with his morning coffee in hand, notices that Miel has woken up early, and his presence makes her jump up. Memories of the previous night return to her, and the girl is amazed at how much the wine went to her head. Miel apologizes profusely for his behavior, to which Bernard replies that he would prefer to sleep separately in the future. Miel is upset that he doesn't see her as a woman at all and feels awkward. But already at breakfast, Miel thinks that, despite the Count's indifference, she would like to extend this time with him. While the Count went for a walk after breakfast, Miel remained at the estate so that Daniel could introduce her to the farm. Miel says that she will rely on Daniel for everything from now on. The young butler is incredibly happy that his mistress has started to speak like a real mistress, but Miel is still not used to it. During the morning, the young countess meets the servants of the estate and inspects the property. In one of the rooms, Miel sighs in surprise when she discovers a piano. Daniel says that Countess Anole often played it and speaks nostalgically of her playing. Miel leafs through the sheet music, thinking about Eliza playing her favorite songs on this piano. Unexpectedly, she finds an old child's drawing among the notes. She recalls that Count William and his wife and child probably lived in this estate before, so it is not surprising. Miel innocently asks if another countess played this piano, and Daniel's face instantly changes. The young countess wonders if she should learn to play too, and turns to the butler to ask his opinion, and he notices how tense and frightened his expression is. Daniel weakly confirms that the previous countess also played, but Miel doesn't have to be able to play if she doesn't want to. Miel nods, realizing that she blurted out about the previous countess without thinking. The former countess had lost her title after William's death, and the servants must have been shocked by this. But no matter how much Miel thought about it later, at that moment, it was not grief that was visible on Daniel's face, but fear. And soon, in the future, Miel will notice a trace of the same fear in all the servants, the origin of which clearly comes from some secret of the Arctis family and their past. Back to the present, Miel meets her personal maid named Layla. The girls exchange greetings very nicely, and Layla is glad that the rumors were not true, and her mistress is the very charm. Daniel quietly notes that all the servants have already fallen in love with Miel, but he still asks to be treated with all severity for any mistakes. Miel, accompanied by Layla and Daniel, really likes the atmosphere in the mansion. Everyone turns out to be very kind and friendly. She was afraid that everyone had not yet recovered from William's death, but life in the mansion goes on, and it is gratifying to see. Miel lags behind the servants a little, noticing an unusual door leading downstairs. The young countess notes that there is a basement in the mansion, but for some reason they walked past it. The girl asks what is there, but Layla hesitates with the answer. The maid can't find what to answer, and Layla's slightly frightened expression attracts Miel's attention again. The atmosphere becomes tense and strange. However, Daniel intervenes in time, explaining that there is a wine cellar in front of them. Although Miel accepts this answer, it does not escape her notice that the butler is also behaving unusually again. As before, when the former countess was mentioned, the butler tried to hide something behind his smile. Miel wonders what happened in the wine cellar. And more importantly, why is everyone so scared? She looks at the tense Daniel and Layla and already decides to ask them what happened in the mansion. But at that moment, someone calls out to her, which forces her to let go of the situation. This man turns out to be Daniel's father, the butler of the Argus estate, Ludwig Philam. The gray-haired man instantly appears next to the group and gives his son a hard slap on the neck. Miel and Layla are shocked by the sight of a family quarrel, while Ludwig scolds his son for addressing his own mistress in a familiar manner. The young countess stands up for poor Daniel, and Ludwig apologizes for them and his son. The old butler says that he was originally looking for the lady to inform her of the arrival of mail. Miel received many invitations to receptions. Returning from a walk, Bernard learns that Countess Eleanor is organizing a reception to which the new Argus couple is invited. He notes that the reception has been organized very quickly and will take place in just 4 days, because Eleanor has long wanted to meet Miel. Bernard sits down next to Miel without a second thought, but she is surprised that he took the same sofa with her and did not sit in his own chair. Having agreed that it would be better not to miss such a meeting, both decide that it is time to prepare for the reception. Miel asks if it's true that she's responsible for the Count's suit, to which Bernard asks who told her that. The young wife learned about this from Daniel, which surprises Bernard. He asks if he and Daniel knew each other before the deal, but Miel doesn't want to mention William's funeral so as not to open up old wounds. She replies in a crumpled voice that she does not satisfy the Count's interests. He begins to be very interested in why she doesn't want to answer his question. But he immediately turns away, deciding that he doesn't care about the relationship between these two, while Miel returns to the topic of clothes. It would have been easier for her to choose a suit if she had known about the Count's preferences in color, jewelry, or style of clothing. But Bernard answers all questions by saying that he has no interests or preferences. Miel takes the Count's lack of initiative for fatigue and lack of interest. So she says she's willing to go alone if he can't make time for the event. He asks not to talk nonsense because people come to the receptions in pairs, and how can he let his wife go alone? The young wife resolutely declares that she does not want to burden the Count even more, and thanks to Eliza, she knows all the rules and will not get into trouble. Bernard gets a little irritated and starts by saying that it's not Miel's competence that bothers him, but halfway through he suddenly falls silent, as if he had suddenly realized something. Miel is surprised by the unexpected silence and waits for him to finish. The Count says that attending receptions is part of his duties, and he has no right to blame everything on Miel. So he intends to go alone with his wife, but even then Miel weakly tries to argue. Bernard pauses, thinking about what his wife had asked him earlier. In the end, he admits that he is a military man, so he does not have a preferred style of clothing as well as anything else. But he assures that he will be satisfied with whatever the occasion offers. Bernard doesn't understand jewelry either, which is why he once asked Miel for help in choosing a gift. He can't help Miel because now is not the time for him to sort out his preferences. Therefore, he suggests that she choose what suits her taste. He trusts her taste, so he will like whatever Miel chooses. Miel is touched by how much the Count trusts her, since he is ready to rely on her completely in such a matter. For a few moments she cannot utter a word, but in the end, he pulls himself together to finally firmly tell the Count what he wants. Miel looks him straight in the eye and firmly declares that she will not disappoint Bernard. Looking at his wife, Bernard again experiences a new, still unconscious feeling. The girl immediately leaves to get to work, leaving Bernard alone in the room. He looks at her in the light, remembering that her eyes sparkled like precious stones. Daniel learns that the Count has completely entrusted his toilet to the young Countess, which pleases and surprises him. And he remembers that the Count had not been picky before it was enough for him that the clothes were not too bright and scented. But this time, Daniel is full of enthusiasm to dress the Count to Miel's taste. Of course, during this time, Miel learned from Eliza how to determine the quality of jewelry, and sometimes even received gifts for her successes. However, it is one thing to know about quality and another to have good taste, so Miel does not relax. Miel goes through the outfits, imagining that some of them would suit him well, or give him an outfit in a style that the Count rarely wears, but which would also look good. Something more extravagant flashes among the options, and Miel thinks that this might be too much. Daniel watches his mistress get carried away with her work with a smile. Previously, when Miel helped the Count with a gift or looked for a wedding dress, she was afraid of making the wrong choice. But now that her loved one said that he trusts her taste, she feels much more confident and calm. Miel fondly thinks that Bernard will look good in any outfit, but she still tries to pick out something that he likes. In the end, Miel settled on a sapphire tailcoat for the Count and an amethyst dress for herself. On the evening before the reception, the Count did not say anything special about his choice of wife, but asked her how he looked in it. Miel is a little embarrassed by his question, but in the end he says that it suits Bernard very well. He smiles at her and thanks her for the compliment, and this is another moment that Miel would like to remember forever. The invitation from Countess Eleanor was accepted for several reasons. The Arctis family and the Eleanor family have been friends ever since the former pulled the latter out of a difficult situation. Besides this, Countess Eleanor herself is a very noble figure in high society. She welcomes Miel very warmly, but the young Countess remembers that you can never know how sincere someone is being with you. This reception is the perfect place for Miel to make her debut as a countess. But enemies are everywhere, and some are looking suspiciously at the new face, and some want to see how she will cope with the role of a countess, and will find a reason to make fun of someone not from their circle. One of the guests present casually recalls that the young woman arrived from Canheim. Both Bernard and Miel instantly tense up, recognizing that this is a ripe opportunity for an attack. The hosts of the evening also feel awkward even before the guest finishes speaking. A young, beautiful girl comments that the city used to be incredibly beautiful, so it's a shame that it's now in ruins. She turns to a calm Miel. But without waiting for a response to his attack, he tactlessly asks whether the young countess had asked for alms. She remembers that Miel was a refugee and asks to tell her about meeting the Count. Bernard begins to get angry and intends to stand up for Miel, accusing the girl of tactlessness and rudeness, but his wife gets ahead of him. She coldly admits that she begged the Count on her knees to give her a job. Bernard is amazed that Miel speaks so openly about the misery and hunger she and her family experienced in Canheim. Even the girl is confused by Miel's answer and is surprised that Miel is telling everything so calmly. Miel says that she is convinced of the purity of her interlocutor's intentions, but advises her to be more careful with jokes about war in the future, and he emphasizes that one should never joke about war, drawing the attention of those present at the table. The girl is ashamed by such a jab, but she immediately backs down, justifying herself by saying that she only wanted to diffuse the situation. Miel closes the topic and thinks that she might have had a different first impression in society. She notices Bernard's gaze on her, and realizing that this whole scene happened before his eyes, he becomes embarrassed. She turns away, burning with embarrassment, but Bernard continues to stare at his wife. He recalls all the previous times when Miel, without relying on him, rose up to meet the enemy herself. After dinner, he goes out onto the balcony to find some peace and quiet to think things over. Miel finds him there, and when Bernard asks about the conversation with the ladies, she replies that everyone is extremely polite to her. Miel notices that Bernard continues to be upset about the situation at dinner and assures him that everything is fine. Bernard objects that it is only for now, but Miel says that such are her duties. The Count, too, knows how terrible war is, and he is convinced that such insults cannot be ignored as if they meant nothing. The young Countess awkwardly wrings her hands, but cannot find anything to say in response to his thoughts. She says that she was looking for the Count because the dancing was starting soon, and it wouldn't hurt for them to join in. In a bad mood, Bernard says that he is a bad dancer, to which Miel replies that Eliza taught her everything. Realizing that he cannot refuse, the Count goes to dance with his wife. But before they could reach the center of the hall, Miel suddenly grabbed him by the arm. Bernard looks back at her in surprise, asking why she did that. Miel modestly replies that this is how married couples usually behave at such parties. And the other ladies at the party pointed out to her that she was too reserved. Then Bernard assumes the position, and the two of them walk across the room in embarrassed silence. He looks back at Miel, thinking that she seems very different today, and he involuntarily thinks how delicious she smells. But as soon as he realizes this thought, shame overcomes the Count completely. Miel notices how red her husband has become and asks if he is well, while the Count tries hard to save face. But Miel is not deceived, and she moves closer, confirming that the Count is all red and sweaty. She is worried that Bernard might have been poisoned or caught a cold on the balcony. But the more she tries to get closer, the more embarrassed Bernard becomes. Finally, he can't take it anymore and mentally screams that Miel is too close. After some time, the reception ends, and Cesario, who was also present, leaves in a carriage. The lady who bumped into Miel during dinner appears next to him and loudly complains to the young man about how the Countess responded to her. The lady is convinced that Miel is so brave because she has a heroic husband by her side, but Cesario asks the girl not to be angry with the Countess. He says that the young Countess had a hard time in the war-torn city, and that is why she is behaving this way now. Cesario appeals to his companion for understanding, which he even achieves, although she remains offended. She continues to be indignant, but the young man no longer responds to this. He remembers the wedding of the Count and Countess, which he attended earlier, and thinks that Miel was not so brave then. Cesario thinks that the new Countess is a very interesting woman, and is even more intrigued by her. Meanwhile, Bernard and Miel also left the event without dancing. Since the Count felt unwell, they apologized to the guests and went home. At the mansion, Miel worries that the Count's temperature is still there, but he assures her that he is fine and asks her to go and rest. But Bernard really does continue to blush whenever he looks in his wife's direction. Miel, not understanding the true reasons, worries about this, believing that he is only getting worse. Already lying in bed, she realizes that the Count cannot fall asleep. Wanting to help her husband, she clenches her fists and gets out of bed. The Count hears Miel leave the room and gets up to check on her. Miel quickly returns with a tray in her hands. She awkwardly notices that the Count has noticed her absence, and he asks if everything is okay with her. The young Countess replies that she went to get tea for the Count. It helps with headaches, calms, and helps you sleep. Miel says that she mixed the herbs herself, and the Count notices that the tea has an unusual purple color. He takes a sip. Miel asks the Count if he likes the tea, to which he replies that it is delicious. He smiles softly and thanks his wife for looking after him. Miel beams at his smile and gratitude. She is incredibly happy that he liked it. Bernard says that the tea is indeed calming and asks if working in the administration was so hard that she learned to brew such tea. Miel modestly admits that it was sometimes difficult for her, but she remembers those times with warmth. The Count expresses the hope that this is true. He asks where Miel learned to count, noting that it is unlikely she could have done so during wartime. Miel replies that her grandmother taught her when she was a child, because she was very educated and was able to teach her more than just counting. She admits that her grandmother herself was from the de Gouver family of counts. Bernard remarks that this is a very noble family, but Miel clenches his fingers and answers with only a simple yes. The Count finishes his tea, thinking about something of his own. He puts his cup down and asks what Miel usually did after work and how she spent her free time. He squints in disbelief at Miel's silence, asking her not to say that this never happened, and Miel quickly assures him that she was resting. But she wonders why the Count suddenly started asking her about her life. Bernard pours a cup for Miel, and instead of answering, asks her not to answer if she is uncomfortable doing so. Miel insists that she is simply surprised that the Count has suddenly become interested in her. The girl immediately blushes, wondering what she is talking about. She immediately finds a convincing reason for the Count's interest, and says that it is for a convincing game of spouses. Miele remembers excitedly how she grabbed Bernard's hand because even the Countess noticed their distance and is afraid that he thinks she is clingy. She drinks her tea in one gulp and tells herself to calm down. And at this point, Bernard says that he just wanted to get to know Miel better. She looks back at her husband in disbelief, perhaps wondering if she might have misheard. But Bernarda confirms her words, saying that there are no other reasons for interest. Miel is speechless. She is afraid of being hurt and does not want to have hopes that she knows will not come true. Miel is worried and does not know what to do and how to react to such revelations from the Count. Meanwhile, at the academy, under cover of night, Dennis persuades Selena to tell her sister everything. Selena tries to object, saying that Miel tried so hard for them. But Dennis says Miel didn't do it, so her younger siblings would have to endure something like this now. He tells Selena that they need to leave and that they will never set foot in this academy again. In the morning, Miel and Daniel do some housework, choosing the right dishes. She is informed that the food budget has decreased due to the reduction of nights, and Miel intends to look into this. But Miel can't fully concentrate on her work because one question is bothering her. She turns to the butler and asks what their relationship is. Daniel is momentarily confused by the strange question. He asks if he is talking about Daniel and the young countess, but Miel explains that he is talking about her and the Count. Because the maids noticed that Bernard began to look at Miel differently, she became interested, and Daniel also noticed it. He doesn't see anything unusual in this, because sometimes couples seem to fall in love all over again after a change of scenery. Miel asks if he also thinks the Count has changed, but Daniel doesn't have time to answer because there's a knock on the door. Layla bursts into the office looking very excited. Dennis and Selena have arrived at the mansion, both waiting for Miel. Miel immediately drops what she's doing and rushes off to see the younger ones. The older sister asks with concern what happened to them and why they are not in class now. But they don't have time to explain anything to her because Selena, as soon as she sees her sister, begins to cry. She throws herself into her sister's arms, unable to hold back her tears. Dennis looks at his sisters with sadness. Miel becomes even more scared and asks what happened, to which Selena tries to answer through tears. That her friends at the academy hate her. Miel, feeling anger rising, hugs her sister and asks what this means. At first, some of her classmates interacted with her, Selena thought, because they knew who Miel was. But due to the difference in their upbringing, Selena had a hard time fitting in with the group. And she finally understood this only today, when a girl named Riche publicly poured tea on her. Riche pretends to apologize, laughing and saying that Selena is still the same. Looking down at the girl on the floor with disdain, she scoffs, saying that she didn't do it on purpose, and asks if she should start stuttering too, so that Selena will understand her better. Selena really wanted to answer the offenders, but she couldn't, afraid of letting down her sister, who tried so hard for their admission. When Selena falls asleep from exhaustion, Dennis declares that she can no longer go to the academy where these snakes have gathered. Miel holds her little sister, trying to make sense of everything she has learned. Dennis says that Selena didn't want to leave the academy for her sister, but as soon as she saw Miel, she immediately burst into tears. She must have been keeping everything to herself for a long time if she couldn't hold back when meeting her loved one. Miel thinks with mad anger that she suffered insults from the arrogant noblewoman, but Selena should not tolerate such a thing. She blames herself for not foreseeing this possibility and for Selena suffering because of her selfishness. Miel grits her teeth and says that she understands Dennis, so she will take Selena's documents from school. Brother suggests hiring a junior teacher. Since they can afford to hire good individual teachers, Selena can get an education no worse than an academic one. Miel thinks so too, but she can't make such a decision alone. She needs to consult with the Count. She wonders if it would be a bad thing to ask him to do something like that. But Dennis asks that Miel not try to solve all the problems for the younger ones, and that they are here so as not to keep her in the dark. Dennis wants to protect Selena, so he intends to deal with the problems himself as the older brother. Miel looks at Dennis sadly, thinking that he can't cope alone, although his sister shared his feelings. In the end, she says that she will solve everything, because the younger ones suffered because of her selfishness, but Dennis gets angry, assuring that he is fine. But Miel doesn't believe it and asks if it's true, which takes Dennis by surprise. She looks at her brother sadly and soulfully, hoping that he will tell her the truth. Dennis looks his sister in the eye and remains silent. But in the end, he can't stand the gaze and turns away tiredly, which gives him away completely. In the end, he says that a bunch of Count's offspring can't do anything to him. He ignores their attacks, so he's fine. Miel calls his name sadly, realizing that Dennis has it harder than he lets on. But the brother says that he is more worried about his older sister, because it is not easy for her now, and the younger ones are adding to the problems. However, Miel does not understand why Dennis thinks that it is not easy for her, because she married the love of her life and will also deal with the problems of the younger ones. She asks her brother not to worry about anything and to go home. After Dennis and Selena return to the mansion, Daniel has dealt with the academy in Miel's stead, also finding out that Dennis has been expelled altogether. Miel dreads the thought of asking the Count for teachers after he helped them get into a prestigious academy. However, Bernard agrees to help with hiring private tutors over lunch without any problem. Miel asks if this will be a burden, but the Count reminds her that he promised to help Selena and Dennis get a good education. Besides, his wife rarely asks him for favors, and finding a teacher is not such a difficult task. Miel asks if they can hire a teacher for each subject, to which Bernard agrees. However, according to Daniel, finding an etiquette teacher will not be easy because noble ladies are demanding in the selection of students. As in the case of Eliza and Miel, it will be easier to immediately find a lady who will agree to be a companion for the children. Bernard asks if Miel would like to ask one of her relatives for help and suggests visiting the Marquis of Dagover. Miel hears this name and freezes in place, because both the Marquis and his entire family had once betrayed her grandmother by turning away from her.